1 minute.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, it is time for another special edition of the most disruptive show covering news, events, and politics in those divided states. In the independent corner, I am your politicalist, Shanahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, let's get straight into the news this morning. There will be a bunch to talk about. Yesterday was the 2020 presidential election, although that election is ongoing. There was no declared winner so far. Not all ballots have been counted in key states, specifically in what appear to be the decisive states of Georgia, North Carolina, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Biden currently has 238 electoral votes. Trump has 213. Following a brief speech by Joe Biden, Trump gave a speech in which he claimed that the election was being fraudulently turned by electoral authorities, warning that he would take the issue to the Supreme Court. We can come back to the other events last night, but let's just start there, Jamarl. What were your thoughts on that back and forth, and what were your thoughts on how the night ended?
Trump is trying to steal the election. That's all that is. Any person that's confident in it, look, I did immediately after we finished, I did a show. Because I tried to get across the level of hysteria that I think should be a part of that. The president of the United States in the middle of an election is basically trying to stop the election and trying to go to the Supreme Court, where he has installed 3 members of that court to get that court to determine and decide that he's president. I mean, this is utterly appalling. Let the votes play out and let it play out. Trump may actually win. Trump still has pathways to victory. Let the vote count play out. But that's not what Trump is doing. So, yeah, I thought that was astonishing in American history for a president to do something like that.
I still don't get
Jamarl, your voice is pitched down like yesterday again.
What the exact allegations of vote fraud that he's claiming are going on. I don't know what he knows or doesn't know. I'll admit that it's a bad look, but like you're saying, he also does have an apparent path to victory here. He is leading in enough of those states at this point without the other ballots having been counted, that he could still very well take it. I'm also reminded, this is just a broader note, of our conversation with Caleb Maupin last night, where we were talking with him, and he was saying no matter what happens, despite what they were telling us, which was that it would be a Biden landslide by all appearances, that's a significant blow again to our ability to figure out where we are as a country. You know what I mean?
The polling was atrocious. Look how close this race is, honestly. And we were told that Biden was it should be a cakewalk. It should be a cakewalk. Like, we were supposed to be in bed at 10 o'clock. What in the world? What happened?
I kind of, in its own way, just for my sleep last night, there would have been an upside to it. If we had been in bed by 10 p.m., I would have been like, oh, well, that's a lot of time there. As it was, we and the other hosts of radio shows on Sputnik gave some excellent coverage going into the evening. I think it ended at about, 3 a.m. Eastern time, something like that. Anywho, good coverage if you want to go back and listen to it. In other related news. One of Georgia's 2 Senate races between David Perdue and John Ossoff is still too close to call. The other Georgia Senate race, this is a double Dewey, is headed to a runoff in January. That race is between Republican Senator Kelly Loeffler and Democrat Raphael Warnock. Republicans, by the way, have won every statewide runoff in Georgia history. So there's some evidence about which way this one is going to go. Prominent Republican Senators Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell have retained their seats, and Republican candidate Madison Cawthorn, 25 years old, has become the youngest senator ever and the first member of the U.S. Upper House to be born in the 1990s. Again, this guy is a senator now. He took the trophy from AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who at this point I believe is 31, but again, she's a representative. So it's a slightly different thing going on there. Meanwhile, voters in Montana, New Jersey, Arizona, and South Dakota decided to legalize recreational marijuana use. This next one's actually big. I didn't realize this until later. Oregon has become the first state to decriminalize hard drugs.
Everything.
Albeit in small amounts.
Everything.
Yes, everything.
Congratulations,
with a bill
to Oregon.
titled
Nobody should be put in a cage for that.
In their own way.
Think about that. I mean, the cop stops you.
No, I hear you.
Whatever you have, and they put you in a cage. The cop may even be an alcoholic, and he was like, "Oh, you shouldn't be using this drug." I mean, yeah, good job, Oregon. What do you think about it, do you think that's too far?
I wish it had happened approximately 18 years ago, so that there would have been some path to resolution for the life of Elliott Smith, who sadly, longtime heroin addict, brilliant singer-songwriter, killed himself. Arguably partially as a result of his heroin addiction. So, if there was some means to treatment like a couple decades ago, that would have been better. But yeah, broadly, I support this stuff. And again, decriminalizing the possession of basically every hard drug, less than 1 gram of heroin or MDMA, 2 grams of cocaine or methamphetamine, 12 grams of psilocybin mushrooms, and 40 doses. That's a number of doses, I'll just put it like that, of LSD, oxycodone, or methadone. In D.C., meanwhile, and we should get him on back again soon to talk about this, Adam Eidinger, that is, voters approved an act that would decriminalize the possession of psilocybin mushrooms and other natural entheogenic substances, such as, for instance, mescaline. That's the main one that comes to mind. But there are others, too. I mean, it was a resounding victory for drug liberation and drug legalization, decriminalization efforts more broadly in a number of states across the country last night. What do you think about that whole situation? And I'll just put it like this. Are you hypothetically in the district in a position where you're considering maybe at some point knowing people who take mushrooms or even possibly taking mushrooms yourself? That was just a really edgy way to ask that question, Jamarl. I'm putting you on the spot here.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, yes. Well, I joked with the doctor saying that I'd be his first patient for the mushroom thing. Yeah, I mean, I have no issue with people dosing or doing pot or doing hair. Well, I don't want people doing hard drugs, if I'm being bluntly honest. But pot, mushrooms, have at it. In fact, the mushroom thing, I am eager to participate into the mushroom thing. So whenever you get back to the States, we can legally in D.C. shroom up. I've done shrooms in Amsterdam. And, in Amsterdam, you can buy them. You could dry it, and you sit in the park, and you wig out. And now, in my case, I got lost.
Man. Oh, no. That's no good. At least you didn't I hear that truffles are terrible. I hear that truffles are absolutely unpalatable.
Yeah, I've never tried truffles.
Yeah, no,
I've done shrooms.
Yeah.
Like where you can, but see, in Amsterdam, you can buy different grades where you can say, okay, I want the strongest. Or you can say, yeah, I don't want to try the strongest. I want let me get number 3. You can do that where you can make an evaluation. But the method in the States where we take somebody and we put them in a cage and we say, we're putting you in this cage for your best interest is appalling. It's appalling.
And it's horribly ironic, too, because usually if you're taking mushrooms, you're trying to get out of some proverbial cage. Often it's not just people who are doing it because they like the colors or the waves or whatever. It's because they're trying to break free of the bounds of their reality, and then to try to take that person and put them in a literal physical cage is it defeats the purpose. It's counterintuitive. Anyway, big news there across the country. I'll move to other news around the world. Though it has weakened, Tropical Storm Eta will linger over large parts of Central America for the coming days, bringing, quote, catastrophic, life-threatening flash flooding, river flooding, and mudslides, end quote. That's according to the National Hurricane Center. The storm has pulled roofs off of houses, taken down trees and power lines, and is causing flooding in Puerto Cabezas. That's a city in one of Nicaragua's poorest regions. Later this week, the storm is expected to reemerge over the Caribbean Sea and possibly move over Cuba by Sunday. By the end of the weekend, Eta could threaten the southeast U.S., particularly Florida, which is in the storm's forecast zone. So we will see where that's going in coming days. In Ethiopia, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has ordered a military offensive against authorities in Tigray state following an alleged attack on an army base there, with his office saying that, quote, this situation has reached a level where it cannot be prevented and controlled through the regular law enforcement mechanisms. Mr. Abiy accused the region's ruling party, the Tigray People's Liberation Front, of launching the attack. And by the way, last year, this same Ethiopian Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed, was given the Nobel Peace Prize. I'm just putting that in the ring for context and contrast. Austrians have been commemorating the victims of a terror attack. The man who killed 4 people in a shooting rampage in Vienna on Monday had sought to join the so-called Islamic State and most likely acted alone this time, Austrian authorities said on Tuesday. Authorities have named the gunman, who was carrying an assault rifle and a fake suicide vest, as Austrian North Macedonian dual national Kustim Fezula. The 20-year-old had previously served time in prison following an April 2019 conviction for an attempt to travel to Syria to join the Islamic State. He was granted early release from his 22-month jail term in December under juvenile law, authorities said, and he was shot dead by police following this attack. In Europe, last headline here, Germany, France, Italy, Austria, Belgium, Spain, and the United Kingdom are among countries turning once again to lockdowns to try and get the disease that is the coronavirus under control. Governments there face another, quote, critical moment for action, end quote, as coronavirus cases surge in parts of Europe and North Africa. That text according to the Director General of the World Health Organization. But these measures are stirring resistance, not just among libertarians who see them as an assault on personal freedom and theorists who say the virus is a planned hoax, but from business owners and independent workers worried for their future. Italy, one of the hardest hit EU countries this spring, has been the scene of violent protests for more than a week as the government brought in new measures, including closing cinemas and theaters and ordering bars and restaurants to shut at 6 p.m. in Spain, which has imposed a nationwide nighttime curfew and implemented regional border closures. Anger spilled onto the streets on Saturday for the second night running, with looting and vandalism breaking out in some cities. 32 people were arrested and 12 injured in Madrid after a protest over the region's midnight to 6 a.m. curfew turned violent. And there were also demonstrations, by the way, over the weekend in Barcelona, Malaga, Vitoria, Valencia, Santander, and Burgos in Spain, and protesting in other countries too, including Belgium. But frankly, we only have so much time, so I'll just, you can look into those for yourself if you want to. In any event, those are our headlines on this edition of Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And Jamarl, we've got like 2 minutes here before we're supposed to go into this break, so I'm going to turn back to the topic that's on pretty much everybody's minds, I'm sure, which, it's the election, man. It's a longer night last night than we might have thought. Where do you think this is going to go? And I'll put it like this. How ugly do you think this is going to get with Trump going to the Supreme Court, this thing getting stretched out over potentially weeks? I don't know where it's going to go. What's your take, man?
Yeah, I don't know where it's going to go either. I mean, the thing is, Donald Trump has no power to stop the vote. So the president of the United States, even if he comes out, stop, he has no power to do that. Also, we're not talking about the vote. We're talking about votes that have already been cast, that are just being counted. And so Trump, that's out of his powers. Now, the catch becomes, as president of the United States, what does he do? And that's when we get into this thing about, like you said, being dragged out. Like, how nasty does it get? How long does it go? Do you get a situation where the Supreme Court is making a ruling? And what is the Supreme Court even ruling on? I mean, if anything, they could just rule on the ballots themselves, but they can't necessarily rule on the election itself. I mean, so, just because Trump is trying to get it to the court because he believes that that's his ace in the hole, it doesn't necessarily mean that the court has anything actionable to rule upon. At least not my understanding. But he's trying to push to the courts as fast as he can. And there are things based on the absentee ballots that are pushing through the courts, so like legal things, legal challenges that have been made in various states. So, I guess the question is, what does the court answer? Like, what's the case? What's the ruling? How broad is the ruling? All of those questions start coming into it. But the very fact that we're having this conversation at all gets into, the absurdity of a Democratic Party that couldn't beat a president with 230,000 deaths on his head. For God's sake. I mean, I'm not going to, but you know what I mean? Like, this should have been a layup.
I do. Here's the thing. It is time. I'm just going to let you continue this train of thought. Of course, it's not mine to let you do, but it's about that time. We're going into a break, and we'll be back on the other side of this break with Jamarl's monologue, talking about, I'm not actually sure, Jamarl. There are any number of things you could be talking about on the other side of this break. It could be the hurricane. We will be back with Jamarl in just a minute. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back.
Fault Lines.
Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik.
Peer into the future with Political Misfits on Thursdays, when we analyze the latest trends in news, politics, and culture. Catch us on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Octung, baby.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station out of Washington, D.C. If you guys want to listen to us, you can catch us on the radio. But, if you're in the area, that's 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and give us a share. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can give us a call at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement makes this show what it is, and so definitely don't be shy. I set up last night, and I had an expectation of the race. Now, the expectation I had of the race wasn't because Joe Biden did something profound or phenomenal. It wasn't because Joe Biden was having a large number of crowds. It wasn't because Joe Biden was kissing babies left and right. And I was like, wow, Joe Biden has kissed 1 million babies. So, of course, he's going to do phenomenal in this race. No, I was getting my information kind of where everyone else was getting theirs. The polling in this had Joe Biden phenomenally ahead. And what we're realizing now is that the polling wasn't so much a scientific measurement. It wasn't an analysis of the way things were. More so, it was what they wanted it to be. There is a difference in those things. How do you get it this monstrously wrong from the standpoint of polling? But put polling to the side for the moment. Regardless of whatever Biden thought, meaning even if he thought, I am 9 points ahead, oh, this is a cakewalk, oh, I'm going to knock this thing out of the park. Even if you think that, what is your job? Answer my question for the moment. Even if you think that, what is your job? What is your philosophical responsibility as President of the United States? Is it, in the midst of a pandemic, where all of this stuff is on fire, to just kind of be inert, to be the general Democrat candidate? I mean, I got to be honest, I don't even know what Joe Biden would do if he was in the office. But we, with all of the crises that avail us, it is the philosophical responsibility of the candidate, meaning of the person who's running to be president of the United States, to be able to deal with that stuff, to have a plan to deal with that stuff, to have a policy to deal with that stuff, a coordinated strategy. This is what I want to do in the office, and this is why I want to get the office. It's not about a job. It's the same thing that Hillary Clinton did, as if she was running for president just because it was the next item on her resume, not because it was time to get things accomplished. This needs to be a wake-up call, not for the elites of the Democratic Party who were more interested in stopping Sanders. It needs to be a wake-up call for everybody else, especially the rest of the people who vote Democrat, or those people who lean Democrat, or those people that wanted Trump out of that office. You can't get Trump out of that office just by putting an inert person there. Yes, Joe Biden may win this race. Joe Biden may find a way to end up winning this race. If I'm being bluntly honest, Joe Biden probably shouldn't win this race. And I could say the same thing about Trump, that he shouldn't win this race. If you have that many deaths on your back, or, maybe you shouldn't win. But the thing about the Democratic Party in this case is this was a layup. You walk out and you say, I am for Medicare for all because we're in the midst of a pandemic. And philosophically, ethically, it is my responsibility, and so I'm going to do this. My name is Joe Biden, vote for me. Do you realize on Fox News, 72 to 74% of the public said they wanted single payer or government-backed health care? For God's sake! And Joe Biden had every opportunity, punching the left. The point I'm trying to make here is that it's not enough to say Trump is horrible. You did that back in 2016 when Hillary Clinton ran. Trump sucks. Trump is horrible. And I get you thought, well, maybe Hillary Clinton is uniquely horrific. And so we can run a candidate and we can do the same thing. It's just with somebody who's more likable. Well, that didn't work, or potentially may not work either. And I'm not even talking about the Supreme Court part. I'm talking about even if you let the vote count go, there's no guarantee that Biden will win this. You're in a situation where the president has millions of people who lost their jobs, millions, hundreds of millions of people who've lost their life. And you still don't know who's president of the United States because the candidate that you ran couldn't beat the guy with all of that on his resume. Meaning it's one thing when Hillary Clinton is running against a blank slate. It's another thing when there are hundreds of thousands of deaths, when there are riots in the streets, when there are floods, fires, and the response to it is ridiculous, when the market is tanking, when you have, 20 million people have lost their jobs, or all of these millions of evictions. You have a resume that you're running against, and you still can't make a cohesive argument to the American public of why they should put you in that office in comparison to somebody else. That's astonishing. Now, you're going to have people out there who are going to go blame Jill Stein. It's like, Jill Stein didn't run this year. I don't care. It's still her fault. Or they're going to try to blame Bernie Sanders. They're going to try to blame anybody else, except for the fact that the candidate that they ran was basically an inert factor. Biden could have went out there and said, I'm pushing Medicare for all. He could have went out there and pushed a policy, a strategy. He could have went out there with a coordinated idea on how to deal with the items that avail us. No, he didn't do that. Joe Biden ran just like Hillary Clinton ran. Like it was your responsibility to put him in that office. And whether he realizes it or not, and I keep saying it, it is the candidate's responsibility to run their race and win or lose. It is not the responsibility of the public to put them in that office. There's a difference in those things. And in this very particular case, Joe Biden still, again, may win. I'm making the point that why is it even this close? And ask yourself, did it need to be this close? The overwhelming majority of the people that were voting for Biden were doing so because they were terrified of Trump. Is that really a striking incentive to vote for a guy, to drag your body out and throw yourself into the rain in order to vote for a particular candidate? Clearly, the answer is no. This race was far closer than it ever should have been. This should have been a layup. But instead of the party looking out for the public's interest, instead of the party doing the most basic and elementary of things that politicians, philosophically anyway, supposed to do when they want people's votes, look for the things that people need and supply those needs. In this very particular case, Trump being uniquely bad, Biden thought that in and of itself was enough of an argument. And so the other items of politics, like ensuring that people have health care in a pandemic and talking about that, ensuring that people, when they get older, they're going to be taken care of, and talking about that, ensuring that, my point is, dealing with the real material concerns of the public, especially now, especially at a time like this. The election did not need to be entirely about Trump. And if you lose this race, I would like to point, in part, that that's part and parcel to why you lost. You didn't want to deal with those real material items. You wanted to make this all about Trump, with this idea that you could get in office free of charge, without entanglements. I don't think it works that way. Maybe, but I don't think it works that way. And one way or the other, the fact that we're sitting here not knowing is a testament to a certain degree of failure, like breathtaking failure on the part of Biden, the DNC, Democrats, and all of that mechanism that worked to try to get him in office. Shane, this should have been a layup. And they wanted to get Biden in without having entanglements. What I mean by that is, if you run and you say, my job and the thing that I'm going to do is healthcare, the public has an expectation of healthcare. Or if you say my job is going to be education, then the public has an expectation of X, or whatever that is. Biden, as you use the term, inert, basically the random Democrat, he believed, and I think part of that was the polling, that he thought, I'm so far ahead. But whether he thought he was ahead or not, the public has problems that needs to be resolved, that needs to be solved. And you would think that it would be the president's or the person who's running responsibility to talk about that stuff. And the only thing Biden could ever talk about was Trump. I mean, it was it's such a sad and obscene thing where you have all of these problems, and the candidate looks at America almost as an afterthought. What do you think about it, Shane?
Well, Biden was running against Trump, so Biden's a sort of negative shadow candidate for Trump, and Trump was running against the establishment. So Trump is, in his own way, a sort of negative rejection of the establishment. In other words, neither of them put forward much of a concrete, positive, unifying vision for America. They're both rejections of some existing status quo, which, from either perspective, is pretty darn frustrating. I mean, you can criticize Biden for how decrepit he is and for the fact that the party that put him into place. You can criticize Trump for how ugly his behavior is and has been as the president in terms of the things that he's done with ICE, just the environment, a whole bunch of different things, even foreign policy to some extent. But I think underlying that, frankly, like on the other side of the election, they're each in their own way nothing candidates in a weird sense. They're each simply a rejection of some existing system instead of a cohesive, positive appeal to create some new system, which is frankly what you would want from a leader instead of like a raving military style antagonistic force, which in a weird way is actually what they both are. Again, if they're both opposing some existing system and trying to either return it to a state of normalcy or simply tear that system down in various ways, and usually it's a bit of both, then there's nothing good, there's nothing concrete, there's nothing like specific, new, positive in both senses of that word that'll come out of that. So I mean, that's the underlying thing. I'm curious though. I want to know the facts about the allegations of voter fraud that are going on. I want to know what specifically Trump is talking about when he's talking about how this has been cheating. The electoral authorities, election authorities have been cheating him. Where is he going with that? What are the actual facts? I mean, here's why I'm wondering about it. Like, I know that we exist, even us, in a sort of media bubble, media ecosystem thing that would keep potential news out of our ears and out of sight of our eyes. And I therefore just want to know like what the facts are. Now, that doesn't mean that he's right. In fact, it probably still means that he's wrong, but I at least want to know more about what he's talking about. And right now I really don't. Hopefully we can get some answers from our guest, Carmine Sabia, when he's on with us. Do you know what he's talking about, Jamarl?
Trump lies as easily as he breathes. And he's been talking about and screaming about the absentee ballots as if they were somehow dramatically different than the mail-in ballots. And, it's like you use that as an attack point. And so what did I say? If you remember, if you think back, I kept saying he's trying to use that as a way of getting to the court with the idea that the court will, deal with the case. But no, it's BS. I need evidence. And Trump hasn't shown any. Trump has just gave assertions. And what it looks like right now is that the president, who may be ahead, wants to stop it because he's ahead. That's what it looks like. He doesn't necessarily want to finish the tally. That's what this is. I mean, that's what this boils down to. And so he's like, I want to stop the vote count. I want to stop the vote count. Trump has a path to victory right now. If he was confident, he would just let the votes play out. But the catch is, if you let those votes play out and you lose, you're stuck with whatever you get. He wants to stop right now, and he wants the court to do it, to verify it. Let's do this. Let's take a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines. We divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today. Get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan, and our guest for this segment and the next, George. And I'm just going to want to make sure right up front that I'm getting this right. George Samueli, is that correct, good sir?
Samueli. The Z is silent. Samueli.
Samueli, thank you so much for that, and I will remember that duly. George, for those listening, is a senior research fellow at the Global Policy Institute, author of the book Bombs for Peace, NATO's Humanitarian War on Yugoslavia, and co-host of Peter Lavelle's The Gaggle. George, thank you again for being with us. We were due to have you on last night for our election coverage, but that ended early with this contested claim of victory by Trump, rejection of the Electoral College, at least at this point as such. Where do you think this is going to go? I'll just start right there, George. Where do you think this is going to go?
Well, I suspect it will go to the courts. As things stand, Trump is quite clearly ahead in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, but they do still have to count the mail-in ballots. And I think that these will be seriously contested because, as things stand in Pennsylvania, ballots can still be counted that have a postmark on the election date, even midnight of the election date, and indeed ballots that suddenly pop up and have no postmarks. In other words, unless they can be shown to have been mailed after the election date, they can still be counted. So given that, and given the size of President Trump's lead in Pennsylvania, which seems to be about 700,000, the Republicans will certainly dispute any sudden appearances of large numbers of ballots in order to swamp Trump's lead. So I think that it's almost certainly going to go all the way up to the Supreme Court, because the stakes are very high.
The people themselves, meaning the voters, and just counting those votes. I heard when Donald Trump came out and said basically, I am going to usurp the will of the voters. Because it's one thing to say, I'm going to let the process play out. It's another thing to say, I'm going to do an end run, and I'm going to go to the Supreme Court to get them to basically call me the winner. Now, the catch becomes, what is he using? What case? Like, all of that stuff comes up as questions in regards to what Donald Trump is doing on this. But how did you view that? That just seems so extreme to me, as opposed to allowing those votes. Like you said, he doesn't want the absentee ballots to be counted.
Well, I don't think he says he doesn't want the absentee ballots. The issue really is, yes, every vote counts, but one should say every legal vote counts. In other words, every vote that was cast legally by a clearly identifiable voter, that should count. Just simply votes popping up without a signature, without a clear identity of the voter, and without a proper postmark, those votes shouldn't be counted. So it's important to mention, yes, every vote should count, but one should add that every legal vote should count, not just votes found randomly here and there.
What do you think is going to become of this? I mean, like you say, it's going to be contested viciously, because at this point,
yes,
it seems like this is going to trail on, and it does seem like it's going to hit the Supreme Court at some point. Do you think the various justices that Donald Trump put in are going to sit down, or are they basically going to weigh in on the case that Trump themselves? I mean, basically, are they going to weigh in on the case of the person who they themselves put in? I mean, who put them in?
Well, that's a very good question. As the way the court now is, you have the three so-called liberal justices. You've got Sotomayor, Kagan, Breyer. Then you've got the others. You've got Roberts and the new Justice Barrett. And then, of course, you've got Thomas and Alito. The question then is, Roberts cannot really be relied upon by Trump to vote in his favor. So it will depend on what happens with Amy Coney Barrett. Very hard to know at this stage. I do think that it was significant that she recused herself when the Pennsylvania vote issue came up last week. So she wasn't a reliable vote for Trump. I suspect that she won't be a reliable vote for Trump, just as Roberts is not a reliable vote for Trump. So it may well be that there could be a 5-4 vote against Trump in the Supreme Court. I don't know, but I'm not at all sure that and particularly in the case of Kavanaugh again did not vote on the Pennsylvania case in the way Trump wanted him to vote. So there may well be a 5-4 vote against Trump on the Supreme Court. So yeah, but I mean, at this stage it's speculation, but it's by no means a certainty that the court will vote in Trump's favor.
I certainly hope that on the high level, sort of abstractly, you are correct that they don't just vote simply because they were put in there by the Republicans. That would, if you're right about that, I certainly think that would be a healthier state for the state of play in America. Mm-hmm. The other side of this, though, is regardless of what happens there, say that Amy Coney Barrett does side with Trump, her admission to the Supreme Court, her nomination, was so heavily contested that I almost wonder if the Democrats, the media, et cetera, and legally possibly would try to contest the Supreme Court, what they're doing. That would be on the highest level of battle. I don't necessarily see that happening for a few reasons. I simply don't see how they could contest it, what their actual legal avenue for doing that would be. And then moreover, I don't know that, like you're saying, that Amy Coney Barrett would sort of blindly side with the Republicans. Where do you, I mean, do you see any possibility of that happening? Say the Supreme Court sides with Trump on this. Looks like they're pushing to make him be president by whatever means. What do you see the response from the Democrats to that being?
Well, if the court does vote in Trump's favor, I'm sure the Democrats will react with fury, as you would expect them to. But then they reacted with fury during the Bush v. Gore time, when, again, it was a 5-4 decision that gave the election to George W. Bush. The Democrats were enraged, but there was nothing really very much that they could do about it because the Supreme Court has the final say. There's no higher court. They could try to impeach Amy Coney Barrett, but that's not going to get anywhere either, particularly as the Democrats have really not done terribly well in the U.S. Senate elections, which have been proved to be a very disappointing results for the Democrats. So any attempt to impeach Barrett, and I don't even know on what grounds, just because you don't like the way she voted, you can't really impeach her for that. But in any case, it wouldn't get anywhere because the Democrats don't have the Senate.
George, that's a really good point that you were making. I want to get to that, the polling. How did they get it so monstrously wrong? Like, I mean, honestly, at 10 o'clock last night, we should have been done. Like, we should have been, eating a sandwich. Like, all right, well, Biden won. The polling said he was going to win by 9, so, he won by 3. But this, way off. Right now, the way it looks, let's see. Trump and Biden both have path to victory. Trump needs to win Pennsylvania, Georgia, North Carolina, and Nevada. Pennsylvania will help Biden, but he could also win Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, and Michigan. Now, those 4 for Trump. Pennsylvania, Georgia, North Carolina, and Nevada. Now, Georgia is typically a Republican state in general. North Carolina usually is Republican, at least for the last several times. Nevada and Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania, Trump is killing it. So he has a path. How is the polling so wrong on these things? Was it wishful thinking?
Well, let's keep in mind, the polls have now been wrong on many, many elections in recent years. I mean, they were wrong in 2016 in the Trump-Clinton election. They were wrong in 2016 over the Brexit referendum in the UK. They were wrong in 2017 in the UK election when Jeremy Corbyn did extremely well. They were wrong in the Israeli election, wrong in the Australian election, wrong in the UK election in 2010, 2015. So really, in the last 10 years, the polls have done very, very badly. And so you really do have to ask questions about their methodology and the biases of the people who are sponsoring the polls. One obvious point is that if you conduct these telephone polling, well, most people don't pick up a call from pollsters. I mean, I don't know about you, but if I get a call from a number I don't recognize, I don't answer it. I mean, who knows who that is? So, and I think that must be the response of of most people. So therefore, you automatically get a self-selecting sample of the sort of people who are happy to talk to pollsters. And I think, given the stigma that exists when you get to the topic of Trump, it's more than likely that Biden supporters or Democratic supporters are more eager to talk to pollsters than are Trump supporters. Because Trump supporters, I think, would be quite reluctant to admit that they support Trump. I mean, we have surveys on that people are reluctant to admit to their friends and colleagues that they're actually supporting Trump. So therefore, it's understandable that they're biased automatically against Trump. But I think also there is a problem of methodology. I think that that they're having difficulties when they go to individual states of finding a representative people to talk to, representative of social groups. So if you go to Pennsylvania, whom do you talk to? Do you talk to steel workers? Do you talk to librarians in the suburbs? Do you talk to people in the cities? And I think they're having difficulties finding representative samples. In other words, finding individuals who are representative of a particular social group. And
George,
I think that's why they're getting...
Let me interrupt you just for a moment because we're going to have to take a break. But I love that point. Fish and water. They're basically the people who would pick up the phone are a group of people in and of themselves. And in the attempt in trying to figure out what America is, it's almost impossible just because the sample that you get are of a particular type. Basically, there's no way to kind of, there's difficulty in trying to weed that out. That's fascinating. Great point. This is, the voice that you're listening to is George Samueli. Thank you. Thank you. Samueli, George Samueli, Senior Research Fellow at the Global Policy Institute, author of the books Bombs for Peace, NATO's Humanitarian War in Yugoslavia, and co-host of Peter Lavelle's The Gaggle. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan. Joining us today is George Samueli. I just want to make sure I get that right. Dr. George Samueli, Senior Research Fellow at Global Policy Institute, author of the books Bombs for Peace, NATO's Humanitarian War on Yugoslavia, and co-host of Peter Lavelle's The Gaggle. So let me ask you this, from the standpoint of policy, Democrats got something monstrously wrong. Like from 2016, there didn't seem to be an autopsy in the way that an autopsy should have been had. Why not? Why not? It's like what's the thing that goes along with this party where they just say, you know what, we're just going to keep it moving, despite the fact that we lost to reality show hosts, and even this time around, again, monstrously close. Like, what is it that they just don't? What's not connecting for the Democratic Party, and why don't they make the necessary adjustments to get the party? Like I said, this was a layup. Or at the very least, it should have been.
Right. Well, I think it's it's human nature not to want to blame yourself for your failures. I think it's always painful to lose, and when it happens, you don't want to blame yourself. You want to blame somebody else. So what the Democrats did was to come up with this ridiculous story that the election was stolen from them by Russia. And this was a completely nonsensical story. There was never any evidence for that. But it was easier to do than to examine themselves as to why they chose a terrible, uninspiring candidate, why they ran a vacuous campaign, and just blame everything on Russia, which is why they did exactly the same thing in this election cycle that they did in the last election cycle. Again, they selected a vacuous candidate who really ran on nothing. It was just, it really was an empty suit, didn't really have any ideas about anything beyond, he's not Trump, he hates Trump, and Trump is the worst thing that has ever befallen America. And just as in 2016, the Democrats ran against Trump and Putin, so this time they ran against Trump and COVID. And this is really unique among all the countries that have been struck by the virus, that they're blaming one person, one political figure, for all of the deaths that have stemmed from the virus. I mean, it's an extraordinary thing, but that was the Democrats' case, that, every single death in America is all the fault of Donald Trump. It was a ridiculous campaign, and of course they've been punished for it because even if they managed to eke out some kind of a victory, it's really pathetic. I mean, as you say, they were up against a reality TV show host, a real estate tycoon, and they couldn't do better than this. I mean, they have to go to court essentially to defeat him. So that's it. So that's 2 election cycles. They haven't learned their lessons. And, knowing the Democrats, I suspect that they're not going to learn any lessons now. Judging by the statements of Nancy Pelosi, I mean, if Trump does become president, you can be sure that her first order of business will be to launch yet another impeachment investigation. It's
so sad.
There's nothing really to be expected from the Democrats.
Let me ask you this, Dr. Samueli. I want to get into this notion of democracy itself, or let's say representative government. And in this kind of strange way that in America it's been inverted. It doesn't seem to be the candidate's responsibility to go and get the votes of the public itself. It seems to be the other way around. And it seems to have been that way if you think about people who are vote shaming, it's like the only way you vote shame is if it's somehow somebody else's responsibility to get your candidate in office. Can you talk about how that creates a race to the bottom when, when it seems that neither candidate cares about the public, like the public is an afterthought. But more than anything else, more important than anything else, I think to me, and the thing that it's more distressing is it seems like this inversion of representative government, where it seems that the parties don't necessarily care what the public wants, what their constituencies, meaning what overt constituencies want. You can do polling on it, like just asking people, hey, what do you want? The numbers are very clear. The party doesn't care. Can you talk about that and the type of world and government that we get when we invert democracy in this way?
Well, that's exactly right. If you were to poll people as to what they really want, the political parties don't do anything like that. For instance, most people want universal health care. I mean, it's the most sensible policy. The current American setup with health insurance is obviously not satisfying the majority of the people. The overwhelming majority of people have no interest in tax cuts. They like big government programs that provide employment. But that's not the programs that the political leaders run on, and particularly when it comes to foreign policy, that the American people, like people everywhere, don't want to get into wars, and they don't want to get involved in stupid military interventions in countries that they've never heard of and couldn't find on a map. So yes, I mean it's what happens when you have political elites who are really very distant from the interests and needs of the voters deciding these questions. I mean, again, it's much more prevalent in the Democratic Party than in the Republican Party, at least since Donald Trump, because in both 2016 and 2020, the Democrats selected as their nominee a candidate who was basically chosen by the party elite. It wasn't chosen by the voters. The actual Democrat voters wanted Bernie Sanders in 2016 and Bernie Sanders again in 2020. That's not what happened. The party decided, no, this is who must be the nominee, Hillary Clinton. She can be trusted to represent corporate interests. She can be trusted to conduct that so-called muscular foreign policy that we elites like, and that she therefore must be the nominee. Same thing happened again with in 2020. So we'll have Biden, and right away we have all the elites, the foreign policy elites, the moneyed elites, the big banks, the big tech. Everybody rallies around Biden. Biden is a safe pair of hands. He will represent our interests. The Republicans, I think, did something different in 2016. In that case, the party elites did not want Donald Trump. They rejected the will of the party elites and chose him. And in 2016, Trump did run on a anti-establishment populist platform. He didn't do that this time around. I think he's been in many ways co-opted by the political establishment that he ran against 4 years ago. And I think that may explain why he hasn't done as well this time around as he did 4 years ago. But in principle, yeah, this is what happens. The voters have very little input in who gets to rule over them. And what happens is occasionally they just vent their frustration and rage. And I think that could well happen, if this election becomes very bitterly contested. There could well be extreme levels of violence in the United States.
George, thank you again for being with us. On the point about Trump not being the establishment candidate this time, or not necessarily not being the establishment candidate this time. In other words, back in 2016, he was very clearly an anti-establishment candidate. At this point, it's a little bit harder to tell. You used the phrase co-opted. I can see that, but I would also use the phrase hamstrung. He over the last couple of years, he might have simply been held back by establishment forces that he admittedly brought in. On the other hand, I don't know what choice he would have had coming into the presidency but to bring in established political figures if he wants to actually get stuff done. That was the sort of catch-22 situation that he was in. And I'm going to note that at least rhetorically, I think this does hold in terms of who's voting for him and why they're voting for him. At least rhetorically, during that last debate, he was setting himself up very clearly as the anti-politician, as the response to Biden's sort of staidness. And, to the extent, for all that Biden tried to make himself feel homey, he is nevertheless a decades-long careerist politician, and Trump was definitely running against that. I'm actually curious. I want to pivot slightly in our last couple of minutes. Mm-hmm. Where do we stand from an international perspective? For outside observers looking at this one, is this just entertainment? I mean, this is a massive, again, another massive blow, I would think, to America's credibility overseas. But I'm curious, are people merely looking at this with apprehension? I know a lot of people overseas, there's a decent degree of support for Biden, again, as something of a return to normalcy. There's also plenty of people in the sort of populist anti-globalist group who definitely want Trump back in the presidency in 2020. Where do you think international observers stand on this one? What do you think is the sort of take from overseas?
Well, I think, that's a very good question. I think that when you get to NATO land, which is most of Europe, most of the NATO governments would love to see Biden there. I mean, then as you say, then it's a return to normalcy, return to the good old days of Atlanticist meetings, commitments to military actions, and so on. And that's obviously true also about the various banking elites, all of those, the Davos crowd, all the Bill Gateses, George Soroses, all the sort of fabulously wealthy types. The kind of populist countries, I think that people like Orban in Hungary, the government in Poland, I think they're quite explicitly rooting for Trump. And I think that is an interesting question as to, if Trump is defeated, then I think that's a real blow to the sort of the populist forces in Europe and elsewhere. Russia, I think think they did want Trump to win in 2016, but I think they've become disenchanted, not so much with Trump himself, but they don't really think Trump has the political strength or imagination or will really to alter U.S. foreign policy. So I think they're looking upon this election with some indifference. They really don't care whether it's Trump or Biden.
This last, we've got to close it up. But this last debate, Trump tried to make it clear that he is harder on Russia than Biden would be. That he's more of an opponent, which I think, unfortunately, the results of years of Russiagate, years of this anti-Russia hysteria. Regardless, George, thank you for joining us. That was Dr. George Samueli, Senior Research Fellow at the Global Policy Institute, author of the book Bombs for Peace: NATO's Humanitarian War on Yugoslavia, and co-host of Peter Lavelle's The Gaggle. We're going out. We'll be back in a minute with headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from the divided states of America, welcome to your daily inoculation for propaganda. In the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant, the last antibody to a sick and seizing political system, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I am your political and institutional analyst. At least that's what I'm saying, Shane Stranahan.
You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Let's go to the headlines. In the news, there is no declared winner so far in the United States presidential election. Not all the ballots have been counted in key states, specifically in Georgia, North Carolina, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Biden currently has 238 electoral votes, Donald Trump 213. Following a brief speech by Joe Biden, Donald Trump gave a speech in which he claimed that the election was being fraudulently turned by electoral authorities, warning that he would take the issue to the Supreme Court. One of Georgia's two Senate races between David Perdue and Jon Ossoff is still too close to call. The other Georgia Senate race is headed to a runoff in January. That race is between Republican Kelly Loeffler and Democrat Ralph Warnock. Republicans have won every statewide runoff in Georgia history. Prominent Republican Senator Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell have retained their seats. Republican candidate Madison Cawthorn, 25 years old, has become the youngest senator ever and the first member of the United States Upper House to be born in 1990. Let's stop there for a moment. Think about, for a moment, Shane, think about all the money that was burned on the lawn to try to get rid of Lindsey Graham. Oh, think about how much money they spent. And Lindsey wins dramatically. Again, polling dramatically
I think it was
off.
Single largest monetary take in a single quarter in a U.S. Senate race in history in American politics. I think it was like $56 million in the last full quarter. We were talking with Jamie Lovegrove. I don't think you were part of the conversation at this point, but we were talking with Jamie Lovegrove during last night's special election coverage. He's from North Carolina's Post and Courier. South Carolina's Post and Courier. We were talking about this stuff. What he was saying was, it was a lot of money, so it's not too little too late, but it was definitely too late. What they needed to do, at least from his perspective, was lead early and lead strong with ads, with big media spends. If they had been able to do that, then they might have made a difference. But as it was, people just didn't see the possibility. People didn't see a realistic prospect of a Democratic candidate actually contesting Lindsey Graham's seat. So no matter how much Lindsey Graham may wring his hands about how he needs more funds, and he was always sitting pretty steady there as far as I can tell. But a lot of money getting burned.
Yeah, that was a lot of money. A lot of money. So let's go to the next one. Voters in Montana, New Jersey, Arizona, South Dakota decided to legalize recreational marijuana use. Oregon has become the first state to decriminalize hard drugs, albeit in small amounts, with a bill titled the Drug Addiction Treatment and Recovery Act, passing by a narrow margin decriminalizing the possession of less than 1 gram of heroin or MDMA, 2 grams of cocaine or methamphetamines, 12 grams of psilocybin mushrooms, and 40 doses of LSD, oxycodone, or methadone. In D.C., meanwhile, voters approved the act, which would decriminalize the possession of psilocybin mushrooms. And Shane, I know this was the one that we had brought the doctor on to discuss and to talk about. So I'm glad this passed. I mean, it seems that D.C. is pretty lit on this stuff.
We should have it's great. We should have another conversation when we bring Dr. McHale back on. Also, of course, Adam Eidinger, who, although he wasn't the person to originally draft this, I think he was the treasurer for this. He was a big part in pushing this, and this is after successfully legalizing weed in D.C. So he really is a rolling there when it comes to the sort of drug liberation movement in the district. And yeah, man, I'm excited for this. It's silly to me. I mean, I don't actually buy into this theory, but have you ever heard of Terence McKenna's theory of mushrooms as this catalyst for the development of human society, development of human language? You ever heard that theory? Yeah, so I don't know if I buy into that completely, but it's always been interesting to think about, and just to think about the fact that, okay, so there's this substance, this naturally occurring substance that humans take that like makes us human, that lets us interact in this deep, symbolic, rich fashion. And then at a certain point, our civilization gets too big, and it doesn't like the fact that substance lets us do that. Like maybe it's damaging to the ossified structures of our civilization, so we ban it. If that happened, that's just tragic. It's just it's this ongoing tragedy. So anyway, that's a little bit of mythopoesis. I don't mean to go too far in that direction, but
that we try to force people to stay in this very specific mode of consciousness. I think it's utterly bizarre. So a person smokes pot, and that person feels, happy, at one with other people, energetic, euphoric, whatever. Then you may have mushrooms where the person feels like they're at one, like this thing of wholeness, like they're at one with the universe and everything else. Or you have other, like mescaline or something like that, where they're interacting with beings where they are either for post-traumatic stress. Sometimes this is work on self, meaning work on person. Oftentimes, especially for stuff like the mescaline or the ayahuasca, these aren't just kind of party drugs. These are people who are trying to do things to repair themselves. You know what I mean? Like, so it's like we try to lock people into this one very specific mode of consciousness, and there are products out there that try to help that. I don't think we should. People making a choice. I want to take X, or I want to take Y. They should be able to take it. I'm far libertarian on this stuff.
I mean, especially like this is legitimately where people, if you've done these substances, or even if you just have sort of experience dealing with people who've done them, you look around at society and you see these deep traumas. And it's not all trauma, it's not all emotional pain. There's also evil and stuff too. But I think a lot of it, frankly, is deep emotional trauma. We're acting out our fears and our prejudices. You look around and you're like, man, if everybody at a certain point in their life decided to do this stuff in order to work through whatever's holding them back, where would we be? Where would the world be? You know what I mean? And I don't think different directions you could go here.
National ash rooms.
I don't think we should mandate it.
National ash rooms.
But I don't think we.
Shane Stranahan.
You don't mandate them.
Right.
No. You don't make people take them. That's either Brave New World or Island.
Yeah.
Two different variations by the same author on that same theme of mass dissemination of psychedelic drugs. But yeah, we don't want that one. But still, if we could all get there, then maybe the world would be a better place if we keep our hands off the nuke buttons. They're too colorful.
What's the negative in that?
The mandating part. We shouldn't make people do it.
Not mandating. I'm joking. I'm not talking about the mandating part. But there have been like sci-fi shows that goes with the theme of people just dosing constantly. Like they're walking around and they're like, take a pill. Or they're doing this and they'll take a pill. And it's like they walk around and it's kind of just weird high. And you think to yourself, well, if there was a planet that did that, so what? The planet makes the choice to do that. Now for us, we look at that and say, well, no, we don't want to do that. We want people in this very specific mode of thought constantly. That's what we need people. Now, for obvious reasons, right? You don't want people in that kind of meditative state on the highway. But hopefully, you know what I mean? But that's the same rules that apply
highway,
like alcohol.
so to speak. So, the highway, so to speak, Jamarl. No, I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, but no, I find these to be positive. I found all of those to be positive. In fact, talking about that, to be specific, I can give you the states that went through. Let's see. Oregon decriminalized possession of all drugs. Oregon legalizes psilocybin. DC decriminalizes psilocybin. New Jersey legalizes cannabis. Arizona legalizes cannabis. I think this is Montana legalizes cannabis. And South Dakota legalizes cannabis up to 52 to 48 with 70% counted. I'm not sure what that meant. And maybe that they're talking about the plants. So positive election for drugs. Oddly enough, in an election that the Democrat seems to be having trouble winning.
Special mention here from Mississippi, which although they did not legalize marijuana fully, they did legalize medical marijuana. So we kind of, I left that out. I left that out of the headline there. Also, Jamarl, this isn't too relevant, but you keep saying psilocybin. It's psilocybin, man. Psilocybin mushrooms. That's the name of the chemical.
I'm sorry. Psilocybin.
Yeah, you're good.
Thank you, Shane.
I'm not trying to be a...
No, thank you. I don't want to keep saying it wrong. I don't want to. It's like an entire show goes and it's like, what? Why did you let me say that? Why did you let me say that? Psilocybin. Thank you, Shane. That's a lot of marijuana being legalized in the United States, and yet the Democratic Party could not get it over the finish line. I guess what the point I'm trying to make here is the people who were voting weren't like far right people. I mean, like, these are lefty policies. And you couldn't even get Joe Biden to say, yeah, I'll legalize pot. You couldn't even get him to do that. And you have all of these states where people are saying, yes, do it. And, the medical marijuana thing, that's a wink and a nod. Come on.
Yeah, in Europe, I'm sure they're going to be curious. They're going to see smoke rising from America, and they're not going to know whether it's flashbangs or weed smoke, and it might just be both. They kind of do go hand in hand.
Yeah, there's a lot of weed. That's a lot of weed being smoked. That's going to be a ton of money for somebody. So, congratulations, America, on that front. So let's go to the next one. Though it has weakened, Tropical Storm ETA will linger over parts of Central America for the coming days, bringing catastrophic, life-threatening flash flooding, river flooding, and mudslides, according to the National Hurricane Center. The storm pulled roofs off houses, took down trees and power lines, and is causing flooding in Puerto Cabezas, a city in one of Nicaragua's poorest regions. Later this week, the storm is expected to reemerge over the Caribbean Sea, with possibly move over Cuba by Sunday. By the end of the weekend, ETA could threaten southeast United States, particularly Florida, which is the storm's forecast cone. Ethiopia's Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed, has ordered a military offensive against authorities in Tigray State, following an alleged attack on an army base, with his office saying, quote, the situation has reached a level where it cannot be prevented or controlled through the regular law enforcement mechanisms, unquote. Mr. Abiy accuses the region's ruling party, the Tigray People Liberation Front, of launching the attack. Last year, Abiy was given the Nobel Peace Prize. I don't know why that's funny to me. It's ironic more than anything else. I think what it boils down to, though, is regardless of a person who gets a Peace Prize or not, I mean, Obama got a Peace Prize also, right? It's environment related. They gave him that, if I remember correctly, because he made a peace with one of the neighboring countries, Eritrea, I believe. These guys have been back and forth at war for a very long time. And he, made peace. They gave him the Peace Prize. But again, those things are contextual and those things are environmental. And if, they put it, let's just say, just because he got a Peace Prize in one case doesn't necessarily mean that the individual was of peace. Let's just say it that way. At least that's my perspective of it. Austrians have been commemorating the victims of a terror attack. The man who killed 4 people in a shooting rampage in Vienna on Monday has sought to join the so-called Islamic State and most likely acted alone, Austrian authorities said on Tuesday. Authorities have named the gunman, who was carrying an assault rifle and a fake suicide vest, as Austrian North Macedonian dual national Kuchtim Fezula. The 20-year-old has previously served time in prison following April 2019 conviction for an attempt to travel to Syria to join ISIS. He was granted early release from his 22-month jail sentence in December under juvenile law, authorities said. He was shot dead by police. Germany, France, Italy, Austria, Belgium, Spain, and the United Kingdom are among the countries in Europe turning once again to lockdowns to try to get the disease under control, meaning COVID-19, and governments face another critical moment of action as coronavirus cases surge in parts of Europe and North Africa. This, according to the Director General of the World Health Organization. But the measures are stirring resistance, not just among libertarians, who see them as an assault on personal freedoms, and theorists, who said the virus is a planned hoax, but from business owners and from independent workers worried about their future. Italy, one of the hardest hit EU countries this spring, has been one of the scenes of violent protests for more than a week as the government brought in new measures, including the closing of cinemas and theaters and the ordering of bars and restaurants shut at 6 p.m. In Spain, which has imposed a nationwide nighttime curfew and implemented regional border closures, anger spilled into the streets on Saturday with its second night running, with looting and vandalism breaking out in some cities. 32 people were arrested and 12 injured in Madrid after protests over the region's midnight to 6 a.m. curfew turned violent, and there were demonstrations over the weekend in Barcelona, Magla, Vitoria, Valencia, Santander, and Burgos. I'm going to end that here. Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And let's go into the break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines. I'm Jamarl Thomas, my co-host Shane Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the Plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not so distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history. This week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and our guest, Nell Watson. Eleanor Watson is a researcher in emerging technologies whose work focuses on the importance of protecting human rights and putting ethics, safety, and the values of the human spirit into the development of AI, that's artificial intelligence. She serves as senior scientific advisor to the Future Society, senior fellow to the Atlantic Council, and holds fellowships from the British Computing Society and Royal Statistical Society, among others. Nell, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
It's very good to have you with us. All right, I wanted to bring you on to talk about a project I saw you starting recently, specifically for folks who are interested in checking this out. Go to edcsymbol.org. EDC, the letters EDC, and then the word symbol.org. It's about endocrine disrupting chemicals and creating a hazard symbol for them. I wanted to sort of go over the basics of this. Some of the stuff I don't know, some of the stuff I know you know very well. Can we just start very simply? What is the endocrine system, and what are endocrine disrupting chemicals? How do they affect that system? Let's just start there. Nell, please.
Certainly. Yeah, that's a good place to start. So The endocrine system is essentially the body's way of organizing its hormones, right? And there are lots of different kinds of hormones, whether those are in the brain or whether those are in the digestive system or whether those are related with sexual characteristics and fertility, etc., estrogen and testosterone, most notably. Some hormones also, some relate to our fight or flight reflexes, right? Like epinephrine, adrenaline, etc. So all of these different elements need to work in harmony with each other for our bodies to be healthy. And there are chemicals which we are increasingly exposed to in our environment, which tend to disrupt those. They tend to disrupt the body's hormone balances in different ways, and we call those endocrine disruptors.
What are some of those disruptors in our environment?
So we're surrounded by these kinds of chemicals. They are particularly prevalent within plastics, BPA, for example, and another leachate from plastic called PFAS. But they're also showing up in the chemicals, even on a receipt, like a bill of receipt that you would get from a cashier. And simply by handling these items, these chemicals can get into our bodies. They're also commonly found within many pesticides, and those run off into rivers. They're also commonly found within birth control chemicals. Birth control chemicals are ingested and then excreted, and those end up in our waterways. And those chemicals don't tend to break down, and so we can easily end up drinking them in again. Or we can be cooking on a Teflon pan, which is very convenient because it's nonstick, of course. But those pans can leach chemicals into the food, which we then ingest. And unfortunately, there's a massively geometrically increasing number in terms of the absolute quantity of chemicals that we are exposed to, as well as the variety of them. It has massively increased over the past 5 decades or so, and it's affecting our body in different ways. So that might include fertility, which has absolutely been devastated in previous decades. Sperm counts, for example, are dropping massively, as well as the rates of aberrant sperm, so sperm that aren't quite right. And of course, that can pass on genetic conditions. Those are all concerns for our health as individuals. But we're now starting to learn that some of these endocrine disrupting chemicals, which stick around in the environment, many of them almost forever, they don't break down, they just continue to build. Some of them actually can affect our genetic lineage. So we've learned that chemicals such as DES, which was a medicine actually given to pregnant ladies in the 50s and 60s. The idea was to prevent miscarriages. But it turns out that chemical affected the offspring. So daughters of women who had taken this DES ended up with much increased risk of cancer, as well as other fertility conditions. And the worst thing is that they're passing that down to following generations. So actually the grandchildren, not only just the granddaughters, but also the grandsons of women who took this drug are affected. So even people who never in their entire existence had any exposure to these chemicals are now having their epigenes, the expression of their genetics changed. And that is resulting in intersex conditions, so babies born somewhere between male and female, as well as increased risk of polycystic ovarian syndrome and other fertility, metabolic, and obesity-related conditions. So even if we were able to wave a magic wand and all of these chemicals disappeared. We don't know how to do that. We can't get rid of these chemicals in any efficient way yet. But even if we were able to do that, the genetic damage is lasting, and that's not going to go away. And there's been research which has recently been published, which suggests that it might even get worse over time. So they looked at fish, and they saw the same pattern of the third generation being affected in an even worse way than the first and second generation. And it's not a good sign, because it means that it might be a little bit like a rip in a pair of tights, where a little tiny hole can easily end up as a huge big ladder. And I don't think that bodes well for the future of humanity, but also, of course, for all of the other animals living on this planet, non-human animals, because these chemicals, they're not just affecting us, they're affecting all of the other animals on the planet, whether those are other mammals like us, or whether they're fish or amphibians. They are also suffering massive problems. So many fish are now being born intersex, between the genders, etc. And this is not good. Not only are we ourselves experiencing these problems, but we depend on these animals. We depend on them for food. We depend on them for keeping our ecosystems healthy. And it seems as if unless we rapidly deal with these chemicals in a global manner, then we may end up poisoning ourselves to death within a matter of decades. Within a few generations, we may be so infertile and so unhealthy, and our genes damaged in such a way that advanced life on planet Earth becomes unviable.
That is worrying. I'll be that blunt and that simple. That does sound very bad. The cumulative damage that you're talking about, that doesn't seem like it would be good for either the human race or for biology simply. I'm going to move to the sort of public advocacy perspective here. I think when most people hear about these things, what most people hear about, even if they don't know the term endocrine disrupting chemicals, they have heard of BPA. A lot of folks have heard of BPA as a potentially dangerous substance in different plastics, specifically supposedly food grade plastics. That's the sort of thin edge of the wedge, I think, when it comes to driving this to greater public attention. Where do you see, so you're pushing for a hazard symbol, much like you have radioactivity hazard symbols, to be put onto products, to be used more widely. What else do you think we would need? We can start with that. What's the process like that you're pushing for there? How widely would you like this to be implemented? But then moreover, you're talking about a huge problem here potentially. What other things need to be done now?
Those are great questions. I indeed have been advocating for a hazard symbol for these chemicals, because I think that consumer awareness is going to be key to beating this problem. You're absolutely right that people are now starting to become aware of BPA, PFAS, these kinds of chemicals showing up in plastics. And people do try generally to make sure that plastics that they use for food containers, etc., are food grade or food safe, which I think is a good step forward. But unfortunately, these endocrine disruptors are showing up in all kinds of things that we wouldn't imagine. So shampoos and cosmetics and food additives, or things that we happen to touch, like the receipts that I mentioned. And this is why I think that educating the public, at least making people aware, is so important. And it's only if we can change products or change product labeling that we can inform consumer choice and thereby enable the free market to help to take care of the problem. Because all things being equal, if you can formulate a product that doesn't have these chemicals in it, it's more likely to sell and sell well.
Well,
I
Eleanor,
think that's
I wanted
an
to interrupt
important
for
first
that for a
step.
moment. I mean, it depends if it's cheaper or not. I mean, the illness, that's the part that I was going to get to, and we only have about a minute or a minute left. But there's an intersection here between this kind of capitalistic impulse of, okay, I'm using this chemical because this chemical is probably cheaper to use, as opposed to using another chemical that's not. And is it possible that, I mean, with the level of technology and the level of chemicals that we're pumping into our modern society, is it just one of those things where the human being, we're putting stuff out where we're not able to really accommodate with a certain knowledge base, and whether or not it's destroying us and our genetic fabric, if that makes sense?
Yes, indeed. We have basically our system of capitalism tends to privatize gain and socialize cost. And that's one of the greatest problems in our world today. I think that informing consumers is a good way to start, but I would also very much like to see international cooperation to phase out the worst of these culprit chemicals so that we can find alternate chemicals that are less damaging and pursue greater innovation in this space to facilitate that.
You guys are listening, or the voice you were listening to, Eleanor Neal Watson, researcher in emerging technologies whose work focuses on the importance of protecting human rights and putting ethics, safety, and human values in the spirit of development of AI. She serves as Senior Scientific Advisor to the Future Society, Senior Fellow to the Atlantic Council, and holds fellowships at the British Computing Society and Royal Statistical Society, among others. You can follow Neal on Twitter at Neal Watson and her website at nealwatson.com. Thank you for joining us. You guys are listening to Fault Lines.
Thank you.
Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
So Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan. Joining us for this segment is writer and editor-at-large at the SabiaReport.com, Carmine Sabia. Carmine, welcome to the show, or welcome back, I should say. Carmine? Okay, well.
Oh, sorry, I accidentally hit mute. How are you guys doing this morning?
Oh, first world problems, right? Look, it's funny. That's one of the things. It's like you have the mute button, and then you hit it, and you're trying to hit it to try to get back in and to join into the Yeah, it's just one of those things that happen in the era of COVID. So what do you think about everything that's taken place up to this point? I mean, let's start here. Polling. What happened? Was the polling just wishful polling? Like, how were they this monstrously wrong in regards to, the level of distinction between where Donald Trump was versus where Joe Biden was?
So let's talk about a couple things. I think here's what we do know from last night's election, okay? Here's what we do know. There was no blue wave. The polling industry is dead as a doornail. Over. Done. Nobody ever listening to them again. Democrats never had a shot at winning Texas or getting rid of McConnell or Graham. And it looks like Collins is going to win in a walk. And we know the court's not going to be packed. The filibuster is not going to be ended. D.C. and Puerto Rico are not going to become states. We also know that nobody spends more money to not win than Mike Bloomberg. We know that I've had 3 hours sleep, and we know that Democrats have major issues with black voters right now. So that's what we know.
Just to be clear, Carmine, I think we're all rolling in about 3 hours of sleep at this point. This is for political pundits and analysts and whatnot. Last night was like the night of not just the year, but almost the decade, if not the century, particularly last night. Where do you think? Yeah, I know. What were you going to say, Carmine?
I've always, I love Donald Trump. I love President Donald Trump. You know that. I was screaming at him last night, you selfish, you this, you that. I want to go to sleep. How long is it going to take you to get out here and do this damn press conference? I'm screaming. My brother's on the phone. He's like, calm down. I said, no, you're in Nevada. It's midnight for you. It's almost 3 o'clock in the morning for me. And I'm up from 6 o'clock doing work, Anyway, and then I got up at 6 o'clock this morning after going to bed about 3:30. So I'm rocking and rolling, guys, on coffee and cigarettes.
Oh man, that's exciting. Yeah, that is the mood this morning. I'm pretty sure for a lot of folks. Where do you think this is going to go, Carmine? Trump called it last night, but also said he's probably going to take it to the Supreme Court. We were talking about this earlier. He may have the votes for it, but this is a contested election to contest all elections. How do you think the Supreme Court's going to respond to this? And how do you think the Democrats are going to respond to the Supreme Court's response? Carmine?
Well, first of all, what are the cases that's going to the Supreme Court? We don't know that yet. So it's hard to predict what they're going to decide until we know what the case is, right? I think they're going to say, no, Pennsylvania, these votes right here, you can't count. I think that's going to happen. I think you can't just Pennsylvania. These states are changing the rules in the middle of the game. Oh, well, I know we passed a law about you have to sign the ballot, but forget about it. You can't do that. These are laws. These aren't suggestions. They're laws. So I think that kind of stuff is going to happen. I got a lot of suspicions about these votes that are being found all of a sudden. You're telling me that Joe Biden won Detroit by better numbers than Hillary Clinton and Obama. But the people of Detroit were like, we're not sure about this Obama and Hillary Clinton guy. Senile Joe? Oh my God, yes, everybody go vote. It's not believable. See, when something defies credulity, you have to question it. When 160,000 votes come in and 150,000 of those are for Joe Biden, you'd be an idiot not to question what's going on. And all you got the news media telling you is, no, you got to accept whatever we tell you. Twitter banned me yesterday. It banned me for 12 hours. It was 12 hours. Because I reported on an actual story of a woman who took a picture of a guy blocking a door at an election polling place. It was an actual story. It actually happened. So you can't say anything. It's frightening to see. It's frightening to see.
It's weird. I want to throw this in there. It's weird to contrast that with the Arab Spring, where almost a decade ago at this point, there are details we could get into there, but in the West, we were trumpeting social media, we were trumpeting Twitter as this sort of free means for people to share what was going on the ground. But apparently, contested election in the United States, you can't do that. It's weird how just a few years changes the tune of practically every politician in the press, in the states. Carmine, back to the election for a second here. It seems like this is coming down to, and please correct me if you think I'm wrong here, it seems like Trump has taken Georgia effectively, North Carolina also going for Trump. It seems like the real contest here is Michigan. You brought up Detroit there. Very tight right now. Trump has a half-point lead with 91% of precincts reporting at this point. Pennsylvania is a much larger lead. It's only 75% of precincts reporting, but the lead there is like 12 points in Trump's favor. But Michigan seems a necessity for Trump. You were just talking about Detroit. How do you think that's going to go in the next couple of days?
God, I don't really want to make a prediction. I mean, I don't know what stunts the Democrats are going to pull. I'm looking at the map. I think Wisconsin's gone. But I don't know that. But it doesn't look great right now, and I don't trust how it was done. But anyway, be that as it may, I think he wins Detroit. I think Trump wins Michigan and Pennsylvania. But I think they're going to really try hard to steal Pennsylvania.
It does look like he's going to take Pennsylvania. I mean, Pennsylvania looks like it's heavy in Trump's favor. But from the standpoint of gimmicks, the president of the United States coming out saying he's immediately taking it to the Supreme Court is a gimmick. Come on. I mean, does the president of the United States just not want the votes counted? Carmine, what's going on with this?
You know, and I love you, brother. But I got to tell you, I love when liberals come out and say, just count the votes. Here's what they're actually saying. Here's what's actually, I'm going to translate. I am going to speak today for you what I like to call liberalese. Here's what they're actually saying. Just count the votes forever till we have enough to win this thing. I know we changed the rules. I know we said that, forget the security envelope, and forget the signature. But
I'm not a liberal. And look, I agree with you. There's rules. I agree with you. Like, look, of anybody, of any lefty that you would come across, I've been the one that's been very straightforward in regardless to Trump. I haven't changed the rules or anything. These are my values. I agree with you in accordance to how close you get to them. It's not moving the goalposts and that stuff. I didn't have a dog in this hunt. I'm just saying, from my standpoint, as a person who's living in a country that's supposedly a representative government, I want votes that are cast to be counted. Not counted until somebody wins. Not counted until the person, wins in the way that they're trying to get a determinative outcome. But no, I do want a transparent election. I want my votes counted. I don't see why that's bad.
Well, we agree, but the problem is they're trying to count votes that they changed the rules on after the game started. Again, Pennsylvania wants to count votes that don't have signatures. Pennsylvania wants to count votes that were not in the security envelope. These are the rules the Pennsylvania legislature set. And the attorney general does not have a right to come on and be like, no, we're going to ignore those rules. You can't do that. You can't do it. But here's a question I have for you guys and in your audience. And it's one I don't have an answer to. Pennsylvania was told to segregate those votes. What if they don't? What if they're like, geez, we messed up. What do? You don't know what those votes are now. What do you do?
And look, I feel you. We have serious problems with the election. I mean, in the election with Sanders, they threw out, New York, 200,000 voters or something to that effect? People who are supposed to be able to vote, or eligible voters. I mean, you have this stuff happens all the time where people get thrown out or kicked out, or it seems like states don't do the job. Florida, great example. Tim Canova was on the show the other night. And Tim Canova was a perfect example where they broke the law. And they didn't seem to be any consequence for the law being broken in regards to the election. So it's not that I don't feel you, and I don't feel like you're like I do get it. But my issue with this is that Donald Trump had been complaining about an election and absentee ballots and all of this other stuff before all of this stuff has even happened. Meaning he was complaining about losing before he even lost, which makes me a little suspicious. Let's just say it that way. Do I have any right in the public, have any right to be suspicious of Donald Trump all of a sudden saying, I'm going to all of a sudden, for some reason, take it to the Supreme Court? Like you say, he hasn't even delineated a reason yet. Other than what I strongly suspect is I got 3 people on a court that I put on. Yeah, take it to the Supreme Court. Or am I too cynical in this?
I mean, you have a right to dance the hula on top of the Empire State Building if you want to, but, I understand where President Trump is coming from. It looked shady from Jump Street. Why were these people insisting on mail-in voting? You can go to Walmart, no problem. You can go here, there, everywhere. You go to work. You can go this year. It's just social distance and wear your mask. No, you can't vote. You can't vote in person. No. That's suspicious as hell. It's suspicious as hell.
That's not suspicious. We're in the middle of a pandemic. 230,000 people have died. You have Europe literally shutting down. Like right-wingers. I'm sorry?
What's more packed? Walmart? What's more packed? Walmart? Or a polling place?
Look, I don't...
Walmart, where you're in for an hour and a half. Polling place, you're in for 5 minutes. What's more packed?
The polling places, you're not in for 5 minutes, you're in for hours because the electoral system in this country is so jacked up. Have you seen those lines? And you would have Obama come out and say, this is democracy. That's not democracy. That's something else. And so you have a lot of people who decide, yeah, I don't want to stand in 5-hour lines. I would rather sit in the thing. I mean, maybe your polling place is like real quick. But I'm telling you, many of those lines, especially Georgia, Florida, many of those places, especially many of the states that shut down polling locations, those places were long. Hours.
Even with that, you could have worn masks and social distance. You cannot convince me that Walmart was safe, but voting was not. You can't convince me of that. There's a reason Democrats fought so hard for it. And as I said to a friend of mine this morning, who's a never Trump Republican, I said, you know what they're doing and you're co-signing it because you hate Trump that much. We all see what they're doing.
No, the reason is pretty straightforward. Democrats, from the standpoint of the way they think, the more people who vote, the better their chances of winning. That's it. So in their heads, if they send out absentee ballots, if people could be lazy and vote from their homes, they think people will vote from their homes and they'll have a better chance of getting in Biden. I mean, they're not wrong for that. That's not illegal. I mean, in all things being equal, you should want more people to vote.
No, I don't.
You don't want more people to vote.
Oh man, this is going to be fun.
I appreciate the honesty. I appreciate the honesty.
We should come back on that one. That'll be a fun conversation. Regardless, got to go into a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines, having a fun interview with Carmine Sabia, writer, editor at large at SabiaReport.com. And by the way, check him out on Twitter, Carmine Sabia, and again, SabiaReport.com. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. We're going into a break. We'll be back in just a minute on the other side of that break.
Fault Lines. Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. And we are joined by Carmine Sabia. He's a writer and the editor at large at SabiaReport.com. And again, check him out on Twitter at Carmine Sabia and check his website out, SabiaReport.com. Carmine, thanks again for being with us. I'm just going to let you guys pick the conversation up right where we left it. As we went out, Carmine, you made a controversial statement. I want to pick right back up on that and get back into it. You said you don't necessarily prefer more people voting. What do you mean by that?
Okay. First of all, I think most people are stupid and have no idea what's going on, so they probably shouldn't vote. I think people say you have to vote. It's your right to vote. I say if you have no idea what's going on, please don't vote. Don't make decisions for me when you don't have a clue as to what you're voting for. Please don't do that. Number one. Number two, I think that more people voting is a good thing, and I would like the whole country to vote, honestly. I like the whole country to be informed voters who go and vote. Here's the thing. Get up out of your chair, unless you're disabled. Get up out of your chair, walk or drive down to your polling place and cast a damn vote. Show minimal effort. Make me believe that you actually give a damn. So you're going to go vote. You're going to take the time. You're going to do it. You're going to vote because you care. Not you're sitting down watching a TV show and you're like, I might as well vote right now. No, that's BS. And I'll tell you what, the cat is out of the bag. Okay. The cat is out of the bag. The horse is out of the barn. I think Democrats are never going back on this. You think it's just a pandemic? No. They're mail-in votes every election. There's going to be mass mail-in voting. They're going to do that every election. This is not going to be a one-time thing. They like what they see. They like the fact that they can manipulate it after the fact. I'm going to trust a bunch of people in Philadelphia, regular Joe Schmoes, to count ballots and then decide the election? This is psychotic.
Yeah, I mean, Jamarl, actually, I want to hand it back over to you just because this is something that stuck out to me like a sore thumb when I was thinking about it this morning. I mean, you saw what the DNC did to Bernie in 2016. You saw the internal party shenanigans. I can't help but think that they're, willing to do the same kind of thing on a national electoral level with Trump. Admittedly, I want to see more evidence. So I'm not going to make any assumptions here, but I don't see any reason to reject it at face value. Jamarl, what's your take on that?
Yeah, but I don't see any reason to be suspicious at face value. I mean, I understand what you're saying for Democrats, Democrat machinery, and all this other stuff. But at the end of the day, what we're basically talking about is votes that just are to be counted. Now, if you want to come up with, let's do it this way. What I can agree with you on is that I want transparency in regards to our elections, however that is. I don't see any moral hazard or any kind of moral stain on an individual who wants to eat bonbons and then vote while they're sitting in their chair. My issue is whether or not the vote is safe. And my problem is when you're dealing with technological means, if you're putting it online or something to that effect, it makes it difficult. So all things being equal, I don't hate this idea of people going in to vote. By the same token, there is nothing wrong with absentee voting. There's nothing wrong with mail-in voting. And the issue and the problem, as you said before we left, too many people would vote. And when you get more people voting, you get more people that have a tendency to trend towards the left. I mean, Fox News had the graphic up about universal health care or government-run health care. I think that's the issue more than anything else. What did Wagner say? I don't want everybody to vote. The Google good government illness, where too many people vote and those people start, making decisions that people of means don't particularly like. Is that what it is, Carmen? I mean, Carmen, more than anything else, that the more people that ended up voting, the more people that may push policy further in a direction that you may not necessarily like.
No, you're looking at it wrong. An absentee ballot, there's nothing wrong with it because you have to actually make an active effort and say, I want an absentee ballot. I want to vote. When you're mass mailing votes to people who probably wouldn't vote, probably have no idea. Come on, man. You really, I'm now acting like Joe Biden, God forbid.
I guess I'm saying, what does it matter? If you mail, what's the difference? What does it matter? If each and every individual in this country on day one, the day they were born, had the ability to vote, and they were required to vote, or for the most part, they just woke up and they just hit the button. What does it matter? The more people that vote, the more people that vote. The only thing that matters is that the people who are voting are actually people that are voting, and not like somebody who's just kind of a computer somewhere manipulating the numbers.
Let me put it to you a different way. Because here's what I contest. I contest that you should have some kind of idea what the hell you're voting about. You should have some kind of idea how government works. You should have some kind of idea about the policies and issues before you do something as dramatic, as impactful to 300 million people as casting a ballot. And I'll put it to you this way. What if I said to you, the more people that perform surgery, the better. Everybody should perform surgery. We need more surgeons out there. No, you don't need school. Just go perform surgery. You have people voting that are clueless. They got to vote in the mail. Oh, Lady Gaga said I should vote for. Okay, let me cast my vote for what Lady Gaga said. You have idiots voting. I'm sorry. I know this is controversial as hell. Come on. What am I telling you?
It's not controversial, but it's sort of like what Churchill said about democracy. It might be a terrible form of government, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it's the best one that we have. I don't know what the alternative there is. I mean, if you try to implement testing, if you try to implement some sort of filter or threshold that people have got to pass in order to be able to vote.
Poll test? Carmen, poll test? Is that where we're going? Is that where we're going with that?
I don't favor that. No. I don't favor that. Here's what I favor. If you want to vote, make an effort. That's what I favor. Either apply for an absentee or mail-in ballot or go to a polling place. But mass mailing of votes is psychotic. If you are so afraid, the Democrats, that these people won't vote unless you shove a ballot in their face, then they shouldn't be voting to begin with.
I mean,
Carmine, that I agree with you on.
Producer Raheem brought this in. Yeah, there's some agreement here. I'm just going to throw this in, and then Jamarl, I'll hand it back over to you. Producer Raheem actually recommended this. Is a sort of charitable take, but civics education, there are like different ways. Yeah, that'd be nice. However it's implemented, there are different ways that you could bring the populace, if that's even a thing anymore, that you can bring the public up to speed on what's important and keep them informed. There are a bunch of different initiatives there, but when it comes down to the brass tacks of whether or not or how you should be able to vote, it gets a little bit more complicated. Anyway, Jamarl.
Well, Carmine, I agree with you on that point, right? I mean, you should be able to get people energized to come out and vote. Joe Biden couldn't get people to come out to a doghouse. Neither could Hillary Clinton. They couldn't fill a doghouse. Donald Trump had people because regardless of what people think of Trump, those crowds were real. Those people were real. And you look at Biden and it's like, yeah, we just want this car park here, with these 5 people in the car park because, that's all we want. That's all we want. Like clearly one side had a lot more energy than the other side. And there's something to be said about that energy being able to get people out of their seats and in to vote. That I agree with you, Carmine. What did they miss? Or what did Democrats get wrong in this election where they couldn't get those people jazzed out of their seats in order to go to the polling place and put it over the top in the way that the polling was talking about?
Well, as much as I dislike him, as much as I dislike his policies, they nominated the wrong guy. They should have had Bernie Sanders up there. Look, here's the thing. Oh man, I really sound like Biden this morning. Stop me. But this is the truth. Democrats, all they need to do if they want to get the same energy behind them as Trump has behind them, stop rigging your damn primary. You keep putting out corporate, shill, empty suit candidates, and you expect people to be energized by them. Why don't you try this crazy idea of having the people who are in your party, I don't know, pick the nominee.
Radical, right? I mean,
that radical idea. Those are radical ideas.
I think
it's funny. No, I mean, you're 100% right. You're 100% right, Carmine. I mean, we talk about that all the time. And it's just interesting. I mean, we're bringing you on. You're a dude on the right. I'm a dude in the center. Jamarl's a dude on the left. It's funny that we all agree on that. It's funny that fundamentally, if you were following specifically in 2016 what was going down, he was the candidate. And he at least it would have been a much more interesting election. I'll put it that way. Arguably, it would have pushed the Overton window in a healthier direction. Would have pushed the sort of span of possible conversations and the span of policies, what people were actually debating over, from more foreign policy BS and from, frankly, the DNC legacy of Russiagate and just simple foreign policy antagonism towards, economic policies at home and boosting up our population. Carmine, you were talking there. What's going on?
Well, I want to say one more thing because I know we're running short on time. The horrible thing to come out of this election, the one thing I feel confident in calling right now, and I don't feel confident in calling much. I don't know who's going to win this thing, but here's what I do know. I know that whoever doesn't win this thing for the next 4 years is never going to accept it. And that's bad. That's bad for our country.
It taints the election. I mean, I agree with you, Carmine. It just taints it. It undermines for example, when Donald Trump wins and they say it was the Russians. Well, if Trump didn't win on his own steam and the Russians helped Donald Trump win, then the race by definition is illegitimate. Or if Obama is Kenyan, it's illegitimate. Yeah, it delegitimizes the race and the president, regardless of who wins, because one side is never going to accept the other side. But let's just be very clear on who's screaming that there's cheating in this. It is not both. It is not both. Just pointing it out. Carmine, I always enjoy having you on for the back and forth. Where can people find your content?
On Twitter and on Facebook. That's the main places I'm running. And go to rockfin.com/Sabia Report. That's ROKFIN. Rockfin.com/Sabia Report. A lot of content that I can't talk about on social media.
You're up there too. Rockfin's getting more and more popular.
Yeah,
I've seen guest after guest go over to Rockfin.
My channel is even on there. I haven't necessarily put videos up, but same here. I mean, people don't trust Google. I think I think what it boils down to is Google has so much power in regards to the space and what we do and what they show, what they don't show. I mean, the way they would or Twitter, the way they would block the content. And so it's like Rockfin becomes that next outlet that allows people to kind of give their content and hopefully get some kind of financial remuneration back for it. So yeah, there's a lot of people moving to Shane.
Absolutely. Yeah, and good luck with it, Carmine. And Carmine, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, guys. God bless.
Absolutely.
Hey, you too. For those listening, that was the voice of Carmine Sabia, writer and editor-at-large at SabiaReport.com. And as he was saying, check him out on Twitter and Facebook, Carmine Sabia. And by the way, Sabia, S-A-B-I-A, just so you know. That's how it's spelled. In any event, we're closing this hour out. Back in a minute with headlines and a post-election wrap-up conversation with our next guest in the next hour. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan, and we'll be back on the other side of this short break.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from the divided states of America, it is time for our last hour this morning of the most disruptive show covering news and events in those states. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the last man on the wall with my co-host, Shane Stranahan, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together on that wall, we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, let's get into the headlines. In the news this morning, well, as you may know, yesterday was Election Day in the United States, and there was no declared winner. There was no actual culmination for that election. We'll get to what happened later on in the night in just a couple of seconds. Not all ballots have been counted in key states, specifically in Georgia, North Carolina, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Biden currently has 238 electoral votes by some counts, Trump 213. Following a brief speech by Joe Biden, Trump gave a speech in which he claimed that the election was being fraudulently turned by electoral authorities, warning that he would take the issue to the Supreme Court. Pennsylvania's votes, we're talking about vote segregation with Carmine Sabia, those seem to be hanging in the balance here, and they could dramatically affect the outcome of this election, depending on what the Supreme Court does when they rule on whether to take those votes or not. In Senate races, one of Georgia's two Senate races between David Perdue and Jon Ossoff is still too close to call. The other Georgia Senate race is headed to a runoff in January. That race is between Republican Senator Kelly Loeffler and Democrat Raphael Warnock. Kelly Loeffler, by the way, was a three-way race with the other contender dropping out. He was a Republican. So assuming the majority of his votes go to Kelly Loeffler in Georgia, she will take that in January. And just as a sort of historical underlining of that fact, or of that assumption, Republicans have won every statewide runoff in Georgia history. So it seems set to do the same in 2021 in January. Prominent Republican Senators Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell have retained their seats. Republican candidate Madison Cawthorn, meanwhile, who's 25 years old, has become the youngest senator ever of all time and the first member of the U.S. upper house to be born in the 1990s. This comes Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, 31 years old, and she's in the House. Again, Madison Cawthorn, 25 years old, and he's in the Senate. She was the youngest person serving now, in Congress. Now he is. Anyway, rambling over myself a little bit there. It's just, I got caught up in this thought. You have a gerontocracy on the presidential level, and then you have the youngest candidate ever, the youngest senator ever, taking his seat. It's just, it's a weird parallel. Times are getting more polarized in all these different ways. Jamarl, before we move on, we've been talking about this obviously throughout the whole show. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? Specifically after that last conversation with Carmine, did he sway your mind when it comes to the mail-in ballots, or are you as resolutely cynical about the idea, skeptical of Trump's claims that those are fake?
No.
Yeah.
Because to me, I want as many people to vote as possible. Because to me, that's what a democracy and a representative government is. I understand the argument that there should be some work or some penalty in it. But why? Why does there need to be a penalty in it? Ultimately, what I want to know is whether or not the individual wants this person or that person. And I want to know that. Now, how I find that out, I don't care all that much how I find that out. I just want it to be efficient. I want to be transparent, and I want to be able to get the answer. I don't need a penalty for it, meaning I don't need you to get out of your couch for it, or I don't need you to do X or the Y for it. I just need the answer, and I need it to be honest. So while we could agree that we want a transparent and honest and fair election, absolutely. I think we disagree on this notion of mail-in. I want people to be able to vote, and I want voting to be easy, period. If that means I lose, then I lose. If that means I win, then I win. And that's the way I view this stuff. When I say you get my vote when you represent my interests, I'm saying that because I want the public itself to be involved in the decision making. And I think oftentimes they don't get involved because they don't believe that the outcome is going to materially affect them. And the public wouldn't necessarily be wrong in that. That needs to change. So no, Carmine didn't sway my point of view on this. I want more people in the public to vote. I want more people invested. Period.
I'm still suspicious, but I'm suspicious of pretty much every side of this. So that's just the status quo there. One side of this conversation that I'll briefly bring in before we move on to other headlines. This is not a non sequitur, but it's just not relevant to this specific election. Alexis de Tocqueville, the French aristocratic author of Democracy in America, early mid-19th century book, he had this sort of broad take on democracy in America. Again, the title of the book, it makes sense that he'd have a take on it, which is what made democracy in America sort of special the world around was the fact that people were very engaged on a local level. That people, it's not that they were making better choices. It's more that they were making more choices. It's that people, you're living in a sort of post-colonial settler state. You're living in a place where you don't have a centralized authority on the ground to make the choices for you. And therefore, you're going through the early stages of industrial revolution. You have this massive ferment and growth in society, a bunch of things needing to be done. Who's going to do them? Well, you and the people your local community. And what this means is it just engenders this sense of local responsibility and civic participation. It engenders really the bread and butter work of daily democracy. And what he saw happening was over time, people would come to rely on the federal government. They would passively cede the responsibility and the authority, the political authority that came with that responsibility to that federal government, and democracy effectively would die. Democracy would not die in darkness. Democracy would die in this sort of detachment from the necessity for political participation. Now, I'm looking at this from the modern era, and I can't help but think he was spot on. I can't help but think he was exactly right. So when Carmine's talking about how people should be more educated, I'm like, yeah, that's true. And I hear what you're saying too, but my take more broadly is we need to figure out if it's possible, if there's some way to not turn the clock back, but to turn the clock forward to some new, more participatory future where people are engaged in making decisions and making informed decisions, most of all, about issues relevant to their needs and interests, then that would be so much better for our society. We would actually have a democracy again. But at this point, people are going into polling places or in the comfort of their own home, checking names and ballots and thinking that suffices, or at least that's the sort of tenor of the moment. I don't know, Jamarl. We got to move on to other headlines, but any quick take there?
I mean, I do think we should have civics in school. I do think civics needs to be a part of our society. I think that has to do with the way we work, if I'm being bluntly honest. I mean, we work in hierarchical structures that are basically totalitarian systems, and then all of a sudden we're supposed to go at it. No, I think that should be built into our society through and through and through. I don't think you can do one and, basically, yes, we should have more civics in our school. Yes, I want people more engaged and involved in that stuff. By the same token, I don't know if people want to continuously make those choices. Would you continuously want to be involved in each and every choice dealing with your local government? I mean, some people might, but I think many people just want clean water. I want clean water when I want clean water. I don't want to have to make decisions on clean water. If that doesn't make sense, like at a certain point, people do give up responsibility because they don't necessarily want to continuously deal with that responsibility. They just want that thing done. Does that make sense?
Yes, I hear you. I completely get what you're saying. You want it done, but I guess where I'm going with it is, if it's done by a federal authority over decades, over these long stretches of political life, then the people ultimately, their power is constantly mediated by their relationship with that higher authority, which effectively is disempowering. It effectively means it breeds this cycle of sort of political neglect and a lack of education, where what we're left with is where we are now, where political parties are getting more and more powerful. People are less and less informed, and instead of voting on what we know and what we're ultimately going to be directly affected by, we're sort of voting through this aperture of political opportunity that comes around to us every couple of years. It's like if we were engaged in politics on a daily basis, and that sounds ugly, especially if you're looking at it with the polarization that we're used to these days. If you're engaged with politics on a daily basis in our local communities, I feel like we'd not only be more effective at political thinking, we'd not only be more educated voters, but we would also probably be more human in a real sense. Like politics, going back to Aristotle, is one of the major components of a functioning, not just a functioning society, but a functioning human mind. I don't know. I could wax poetic on this stuff. We could get deeper into the details here. But yeah, man, I think we should go into headlines. Voters in Montana, New Jersey, Arizona, and South Dakota decided to legalize recreational marijuana use. Oregon has become the first state to decriminalize hard drugs, albeit in small amounts, with the bill titled the Drug Addiction Treatment and Recovery Act, passing by a narrow margin. That bill decriminalizes the possession of less than 1 gram of heroin or MDMA, 2 grams of cocaine or methamphetamine, 12 grams of psilocybin mushrooms, and 40 doses of LSD, oxycodone, or methadone. That is a big shift. Again, the first state to decriminalize hard drugs, albeit in small amounts. And they're doing it from the right angle, where, it's not a sort of libertarian, laissez-faire, free-for-all, but they're like, hey, we got people with problems in our society. Instead of criminalizing what amounts to long-run treatment of depression in a lot of cases, just an escape from reality, you should try to rehabilitate them. And hopefully if you do that with other measures at the same time, get people into jobs and stuff, or get people into therapy, frankly.
I'm so glad you just said that. No, what you just said is spot on. Get people, because I think the issue with drugs, it's not the drug itself, believe it or not. The issue with drugs is the environment that our society creates. And putting people in situations, or if people are in situations where they need a like you say, a detour from reality. Well, maybe the detour from reality is, oh my God, I don't have any way to pay rent. Oh my God, I don't have a house. Oh my God, I don't have healthcare. There's all of these things that individuals need to be whole and to be plugged into the larger society. And when those things are lacking, that individual suffers. And so I'm glad you said get people jobs, because I think that's part of the component of it, meaning that individual and how that individual gets plugged into the society itself. I agree with, yeah.
It's important, man. Interesting conversations today. In other news, internationally, through this weekend, though it has weakened, Tropical Storm Eta will linger over large parts of Central America for the coming days, bringing, quote, catastrophic, life-threatening flash flooding, river flooding, and mudslides, end quote. That's according to the National Hurricane Center. That storm pulled roofs off of houses, took down trees and power lines, and is currently causing flooding in Puerto Cabezas. That's a city in one of Nicaragua's poorest regions. Later this week, the storm is expected to reemerge over the Caribbean Sea and possibly move over Cuba by Sunday. By the end of the weekend, Eta could threaten the southeast U.S., particularly Florida, which is in the storm's forecast cone. In Ethiopia, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has ordered a military offensive against authorities in Tigray state following an alleged attack on an army base there, with his office saying that, quote, this situation has reached a level where it cannot be prevented and controlled through the regular law enforcement mechanisms, quote, end quote. Mr. Abiy accused the region's ruling party, the Tigray People's Liberation Front, of launching the attack. Last year, Abiy was given the Nobel Peace Prize. In Austria, Austrians have been commemorating the victims of a terror attack The man who killed 4 people in a shooting rampage in Vienna on Monday had sought to join the so-called Islamic State and most likely acted alone, Austrian authorities said on Tuesday. Authorities have named the gunman, who is carrying an assault rifle and a fake suicide vest, as Austrian North Macedonian dual national Kustim Perzula. The 20-year-old had previously served time in prison following an April 2019 conviction for an attempt to travel to Syria to join the Islamic State. He was granted early release, however, from his 22-month jail term in December under juvenile law, authorities said, and he was shot dead by police. In our last headline this morning, Germany, France, Italy, Austria, Belgium, Spain, and the United Kingdom are among countries in Europe turning once again to lockdowns to try and get the disease that is the coronavirus under control. Governments face another, quote, critical moment for action, end quote, as coronavirus cases surge in parts of Europe and North Africa. That, according to the Director General of the World Health Organization, old Tedros over there. But the measures are stirring resistance, not just among libertarians who see them as an assault on personal freedom and theorists who see the virus as a planned hoax, but from business owners and independent workers, your economic moderates, who are worried for their future. Italy, one of the hardest hit EU countries this spring, has been the scene of violent protests for more than a week as the government brought in new measures, including closing cinemas and theaters and ordering bars and restaurants to shut at 6 p.m. I remember seeing flashbangs and tear gas going on in a number of cities as major protests got a little bit more violent. In Spain, which has imposed a nationwide nighttime curfew and implemented regional border closures, anger spilled onto the streets on Saturday for the second night running, with looting and vandalism breaking out in some cities. 32 people there were arrested and 12 injured in Madrid after a protest over the region's midnight to 6 a.m. curfew turned violent. There were also demonstrations over the weekend in Barcelona, Malaga, Vitoria, Valencia, Santander, and Burgos. And with that, you've listened to our headlines on Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And we are going into a break. We will be back on the other side of this break talking about the election. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back.
Fault Lines. Catch all the breaking global, political, and economic news as it happens. Sputnik brings an all-star lineup with expert opinion from some of the biggest names in the news today. Noam Chomsky.
Turkey, U.S. ally, their main goal is to attack the Kurds, the one ground force opposing ISIS. And there have been a kind of a funnel for support of ISIS, not officially, but in practice.
Peter Sunde, co-founder of the Pirate Bay.
We don't have any sort of democratic control over the internet. And I think that we're very naive when we think that the internet itself is intrinsically good. It's not. It's just a very neutral technology that is being used for good things, but more and more being used for evil things.
Icelandic Foreign Minister Gunnar Bragi Sveinsson.
Increased activities in the Keflavik airbase, and that has to do with more activities from the Russian Northern Fleet in the ocean around Iceland, and also, of course, these usual flights of the bombers.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
We're the ones that destroyed the government of Libya. We're the ones that, in a pipeline dispute, that helped destroy the government of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. We're the ones who invaded Iraq.
Former U.S. Secretary of Defense William Perry.
The hostile relationship between the United States and Russia today is dangerous for both countries, not because either country would actually want to start a military conflict, but because there's always a danger of blundering.
Sputnik talks to the brightest minds in politics and current affairs to find out what's really happening. Tune in. Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content, definitely give us a like and give us the share. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can definitely do that. You can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. 1320. Your engagement makes this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. That said, joining us, however, for this segment, Tim Canova, political activist and law professor whose work as chairman of the Progress for All is focused on supporting progressive candidates and causes at the national, state, and local levels. Tim, how's it going, man? Doing all right?
Going well. Thank you, Jamarl. How are you?
I am doing all right. I know you're probably tired. You were up late with us last night, and we appreciate it. Yeah. What do you think of all of this that's been going on so far? I mean, let's be very specific. This race shouldn't be this close. This race should have been a layup. And yet right now, Donald Trump has a clear pathway to the White House. You know, Biden also has a pathway. I just mean from the standpoint of it's a close race. And it's far closer than what anybody thought it was going to be. And it was far closer than what a lot of Democrats was praying it was going to end up being. What do you think about all of it?
I never believed the polls at all. 4 years ago, 95% of the polls showed Hillary Clinton winning. These polls are based on calling 600, 800 so-called likely voters. I think they're being cherry-picked. I think the polls were rigged for Joe Biden, quite frankly.
Well, I was wondering whether or not the polls were trying to depict reality or whether the polls were trying to show reality. Because, you know, to your point, sometimes human beings have a tendency to look around and determine their world. Like, it's like, okay, what is Bob doing? Okay, Bob is doing this, so okay, I'm going to do this. Even if they don't do it on a conscious level, oftentimes they do it. It leads the perspective. And you get Biden with a massive lead, which seems to give this impression that Biden is leading massively, even though you didn't see it in the, you know, the speeches and stuff like that. It seemed invisible.
You didn't see it in the rallies.
Yeah.
You didn't see it really anywhere. He was afraid to come out and debate. He hardly appeared anywhere, but the polls kept showing him winning, some by ridiculous amounts. And then you have the actual vote tallies coming in yesterday, and they departed quite dramatically from those polls. So I didn't believe the polls. And then the election day results, I'm not quite sure why anyone would have full faith in the election results anyway. We're the only major country that calls itself a democracy that uses electronic voting machines. They are inherently vulnerable to hacking and to software manipulation. Why would anyone have confidence in results in any jurisdiction that uses electronic voting?
Look, I think that's a decent question. I mean, personally, I'm one of those people who are into paper ballots. I think you could see it, you can read it, put a bunch of people in a room, let those people count. I don't need it to be done immediately. I just need it to be done accurately in a way where the public can look at it and say, okay, fair enough, it was a fair contest. Because I think the problem that we hit upon with stuff like this is this notion of whether or not it was honest. And when you get people on the right or people on the left that starts questioning the integrity of the vote, meaning the integrity of the process itself, then this issue of who's in charge gets dodgy. Like you get people like, for example, Carmine made the point that nobody's going to accept this result going forward if the court gets involved, as opposed to having the votes play out.
No one's going to accept the results anyway.
Exactly.
No one's going to accept the results if the court doesn't get involved. And you take a look, when we went to sleep last night, Trump's ahead in a whole bunch of different states. Wake up, and he's now behind in Wisconsin and Michigan. States would get Democratic governors. There's no way people are going to accept these results as legitimate.
I don't know that they should. I mean, particularly, I know that you ran against Debbie Wasserman Schultz. I know that both of you guys, along with myself, are watching the 2016 DNC rejection of Bernie Sanders. I can't help but be reminded of that in 2020 in the general election. At this point, it doesn't seem beyond their grasp or their attempt to try to do that. Tim.
Yeah, they have the means the opportunity, the capability of rigging elections electronically. I remember 2016 well, where it certainly seemed like they rigged the voting machines, and then when we tried to verify the votes, they simply illegally threw out all the ballots. But it more reminds me of 2018, where you saw that the race for governor of Florida and the race for senator of Florida came to a crash in Broward County. The polls closed, the votes are being counted, and for days afterwards, the supervisor of election, Brenda Snipes at the time, the same corrupt supervisor who had illegally thrown out all our ballots the year before, well, she started to find 1,000 ballots here, 1,000 ballots there. They have a print-on-demand machine where you can print out ballots. And I think it was the DeSantis campaign, who ended up winning, the Republican governor, who went to court, and the court shut down the time of finding more ballots. That's how corrupt this is. There's no chain of custody that was believable on the ballots in Broward County in 2018. And I don't know what kind of chain of custody would exist anywhere in this country, not just on the paper ballots, but on the electronic voting machines, which incidentally, all over the state of Florida, have wireless cellular modems on them. So there's no reason to have trust and confidence in election results in this country. And we are way past time to be demanding paper ballots that are counted by hand in public the way the rest of the world does. At this point, it's very frustrating. I think they have a more transparent election system in countries like Afghanistan or in Egypt, where they literally have to dip their thumbs in ink.
I do agree with you with the electoral thing. I mean, I understand that we try to modernize everything and we try to make everything high tech. But as a software engineer, there's a gap always in between technological, like voting. Meaning, if you go and you put your number into the machine, it doesn't just immediately go and drop a tally somewhere, like a little rock in a container somewhere. No, there's logic in that is going to tally that stuff up. So I understand where you're coming from with this idea that, voting machines always creates an ambiguity, it always creates doubt in any sort of electoral process. And yet we accept these things we accept these things in our politics. Why do you think it was this close, Tim? Take everything aside for the moment. Like, meaning, these guys are running a race. And let's say, clearly, the results, meaning the election, let's say the election is what it is, whatever that number is. Why do you think it's this close? How does a president lose 220,000 people? You have riots in the streets. You have fires, apparently, in one part of the country. You have floods in the other part of the country. You have millions of people unemployed, millions without health care. You have health care that is being in the Supreme Court right now that potentially is going to get struck down, meaning Obamacare. How does a president win under all of that? Because that's astonishing.
Yeah, and a president who had the entire media against him, had social media censoring any kind of article critical, any news reports critical of his opponent and his opponent's son. I mean, this was blatant censorship. How does a president win under those conditions? Well, for the last few weeks, anywhere you went, you saw gigantic Trump rallies everywhere. And Joe Biden couldn't fill a bathroom with supporters, it seemed. So you could try to it might be hard for some people to understand where Donald Trump's support comes from. They had difficulty understanding 4 years ago. Quite frankly, it was the failure of the Obama administration for 8 years, doing nothing for the middle class and poor working folks. It demoralized the turnout among those groups for Democrats, and it fueled the backlash. And what did Donald Trump promise? The same thing that Bernie Sanders did, to kill the Trans-Pacific Partnership, to stop these global trade agreements that were outsourcing jobs by the millions to countries like China. And he kept many of his promises. I certainly understand where his support came from. I think the bigger question is why anyone thought Joe Biden could actually win this race. He doesn't seem capable and up to the job to begin with. And that final debate was such a contrast, with Joe Biden promising to inflict more pain, keep us shut down longer, And Donald Trump saying, no, it's enough already. It's time to open up the economy. And I know we started to have this conversation last night. Yes, 225,000 COVID deaths. And what's happened to pneumonia and influenza and heart attacks? They've just disappeared suddenly from the CDC statistics. And you look at how many people actually died this year compared to last year, fewer. So I don't mean to say there's not a COVID virus. I imagine there is.
Well, the New York Times came out with an article that was talking about hundreds of thousands of additional deaths this year.
Yeah, well, let's see it. If they were, the CDC would have been posting it. There weren't hundreds of thousands of additional deaths. It's quite the opposite. There's fewer deaths this year than last year. Fewer. That's the CDC's own numbers. And it gets to the point where the remedy is worse than the disease.
Okay, let's do this. Let's take a break and let's get into that in the next segment. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. The guest, Tim Canova, political activist and law professor whose work as chairman of the Progress for All is focused on supporting progressive candidates and causes for national, state, and local levels. You guys are listening to Fault Lines. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
You check top.
We couldn't put it better ourselves. Tune in to Political Misfits on Mondays at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Miss the Press, our weekly takedown of Sunday's toothless news talk shows.
Fault lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan, and our guest, Tim Canova, political activist and law professor whose work as chairman of Progress for All is focused on supporting progressive candidates in causes at the national, state, and local levels. And by the way, check out that website, progressforall.org, and also check out Tim's Twitter feed, Tim_Canova, and that is Canova spelled Canova. Tim, I want to turn slightly. Looking forward to 2024, 2028 even, maybe even 2032 if we want to go more than a decade out. From a progressive perspective, looking at this either with an attempt to reform the DNC, which is so badly bungled this election and the last, that it seems almost unrecoverable as a primary political party with vigor, whatever that specifically means. Either trying to reform the DNC or trying to push or create another third-party option that might supplant it in the long run. Where would you go? Am I looking at this from the right perspective? But from a progressive perspective, broadly, how can you actually get that representation that I think the Democrat Party would have done well to have, would have done better in 2016 if it had represented, with Bernie specifically? What do you think are the next steps in the long haul and the short haul for pushing that, Tim?
I don't think it's possible to reform the DNC to make it a more progressive entity. It's corporate funded through and through. It's never going to change. I don't think it's much of a chance to get a progressive third party in this country. They rigged the voting machines against it. I have little doubt that the voting machines were rigged against Jill Stein, just to keep the Greens below 5%. Nothing's going to change as long as we have rigged elections. Not a thing.
So what do you suggest, Tim, for I mean, like, in general? I mean, because basically, yeah, let's just start there. What do you suggest? I mean,
let me ask you this. Do you think we have a functioning democracy?
No, I don't. I think we have all sorts of problems without democracy, even if everything worked exactly the way they say it worked. Meaning, like even if you're talking about the money that's dumped into it to change public opinion, or the way that the media functions and those type of things, or the way that we game the systems of keeping the lines longer by shutting down polling locations or voter ID laws, or no, we do all sorts of things to make it difficult to vote in this country. So, no.
To make it difficult to vote, to manipulate the vote, to rig the vote, to rig the software, to rig the media. This is not even close to a democracy. So why pretend it is?
How far do you think that goes?
We'd be better off. We'd be better off not voting, or we'd be better off having a military rule to restore the republic. It's one or the other.
Well, I mean, but how do you know that? I mean, you're basically saying you would like a military junta to take over the United States.
No, I would like a real functioning democracy with real voting machines.
So
how are you going to get that? Is Congress going to vote it? The members who keep getting reelected? Even though Congress has an approval rating in the single digits, they keep getting reelected. The results are ridiculously improbable.
That's because it's scammed.
The results of my last two elections were declared statistically impossible.
But I know, but it's scammed. I mean, it's scammed through, for example, the fact that you end up with a Trump versus Biden, and then you have people to decide. That in and of itself is a scam. Like the two-party system, the two-party structure, the fact that you don't have other people to vote for. Even the way the mode of thought is constrained between these two parties, as if these are the only two, flavors to choose from.
I would love to see viable third parties. Absolutely. It's not going to happen. The voting, the counting of the votes is rigged by the two parties, the establishment. It's very nice to be able to comment on this stuff and to be political pundits, but that's the reality. Our choices are basically selected for us. These aren't elections. Joe Biden, how did he win that nomination? That was really something, wasn't it? He's in third and fourth place in the polls.
Is the military junta the only way out? Is that the only way out?
Yeah, but here's the thing. Even if we're having that conversation, I don't see how that works. Again, who would the military junta be by, and how can you have any assurance that they're going to be any more ethical than the parties that we currently have in place?
You can't. That's the problem. You don't know.
I mean, okay, so here's another option. I'm going to put this forward as another option. This is not this election cycle or the next three, like I was hinting at. This is over a decades-long basis. But American politics has gotten more stagnant, more sclerotic. If that trend keeps up, sure, they're going to keep trying to keep their grips on the handles of this, on the reins of this thing. But in the long run, they get weaker. You build up more elites within society. That's the sort of simplest, most brass tacks form. You build up competing elites, and ideally some of those elites actually do represent what people want. And then they take over, you push them to take over, that happens. That might not happen in this election cycle, but in a sort of extremely abstract sense, as our democracy, what makes this possible is that as our democracy degrades, the people who have their hands on the reins of the current status quo, their power degrades too. Tim, that's again too blunt, but what's your take?
In 2020, candidates could not even campaign in public. People were locked in their homes basically for months. There'll be another pandemic. They'll come up with some other virus. There's no First Amendment left.
Tim, the virus is a real thing. I mean, nobody conjured up the virus in order to keep people in their homes.
Well, you don't know where the virus came from, quite frankly.
Well, as a flat fact, you're right. I don't know where the virus came from. I would make the point, though, that neither do you. And between the two of us, you're making the assumption that somebody cooked it up. It seems to be a larger order of magnitude as opposed to believing that a virus happened because viruses happen.
I have not made that assumption. What I have basically said is there was a virus. There will be future viruses. Look at the way the virus was manipulated for political gain. The distribution of wealth was completely directed towards the top big companies like Walmart and Amazon. Small businesses went out of business. People became more dependent on government handouts than ever before. The rich got richer, the poor got poorer, and the First Amendment got shredded. Freedom of assembly. If masks are so effective, well, let people who have comorbidities wear their masks. Everyone's got to wear the mask. You can't even have that discussion. There's no First Amendment left. There's nothing but propaganda on the mainstream media. 5 big conglomerates own 90% of the media now. And then the big tech giants can censor with abandon. No, this is not even close to a democracy.
That I agree with
but
you.
here's the thing: is that everybody sees the tech giant censoring too. I mean, here's the other thing. I mean, it's for I agree that there are troubling trends towards dystopia and towards the sort of 1984 Orwellian vision of society. But at the same time, we're having this conversation. Everybody on Twitter that was in the political space, specifically on the right, was talking about the Hunter Biden story suppression while it was ongoing. The algorithms just aren't that good. Now, I admit there's a slope here. Things are going to get worse probably in that way, but go for it. Tim, what's your take?
51% of the public thought the Hunter Biden story was a fake story brought to us by Russia. 51%.
How do you know that, though? You're talking about those polls. How do you know that those polls are accurate? That's the thing. We're talking about the system misrepresenting itself. I think that would hold true for that too.
Well, that's possible. I know anecdotally the Democrats I would speak to before the election, they either didn't hear the Hunter Biden story, many of them, maybe even most, or they had already formed an opinion that it was fake news.
Yeah, but they formed that opinion because it was in their interest to form that opinion. And like, it really was. I mean, like the Hunter Biden story. I think, it's funny. I think the gist of what you say, I think I agree with you, Tim. Like, I don't, everything that you said right there, where you're talking about, I fundamentally agree. I just guess, I guess the question is, how do you get out? And I think that's where, the answer, or that's where it gets more interesting, because under your model of this, there is no way, meaning there is no voting solution. There is no even organization solution. There is no political solution at all.
We're talking about a Republican form of government that has been destroyed. And how do you fight to reclaim it?
Right.
In past generations, you had a civil war where there was violence, organized, armies. I have no idea what loyal Americans who have the power want to restore the republic. And you don't either. But I'm tired of just pretending, let's comment on the elections. Why did Joe Biden not perform as well as he did? How come somehow overnight Michigan and Wisconsin and Arizona and Nevada, states with Democratic governors, somehow, the votes came in overnight. Now he's ahead. He's going to win. Yeah. I don't want to lend any legitimacy to this. It's a false narrative through and through. And I can certainly understand the hostility of Trump supporters at this point not to believe any of the election results.
I believe that too. I can see why. I mean, again, we're just talking about this back in 2016. If the DNC was willing to do that to Bernie, it's not out of bounds for them to try to do that to Trump, to the arguably less of an existential threat.
Trump, 3 years of a fake Russia investigation, a fake impeachment over Ukraine, over a phone call. Compare that to everything the Biden family did in Ukraine. I mean, they never accepted the results of the election and did everything they could to undermine a duly elected president. But they wouldn't rig the votes in Democratic states, Nevada, Michigan, Wisconsin, when no one's looking. I don't believe any of it.
I hear you on that in a broad sense.
I was a Democrat my whole life. I believed in democratic values. And at this point, I've come to believe all they do is talk a good game. They talk about the need for, a new deal for this, a new deal for that. But when they get in power, they don't do any of it. They are owned and controlled by the biggest corporations around and the biggest billionaires.
Tim, I'm gonna pivot for a second. We're talking about politics broadly, but you were also just rejecting it per se. I can do the same thing. If you don't want to, if you don't think that it's viable to focus on that or to sort of speak of it in these superficial terms, and I admit there's a certain sense of superficiality. We're talking about the decline of our polity, talking about these big issues. I get where you're coming from with that. I mean, where I go personally is like building up my family, building up my community, trying to buy a property and buy a farm and grow stuff on it. That's where my mind goes. I'm just curious, but pivoting slightly, where do you go?
Well, I join you on that, is trying to stay healthy, keep my immune system healthy, my loved ones as well. Everything you said that you're trying to do for your family certainly are the kinds of things I'm trying to do for mine. So, yes, I do think that because there's so much less opportunity now to bring about change collectively because of the false system that we're living in, it's very important to take care of ourselves individually and our families. I've got no disagreement whatsoever there.
So Tim, what's next? Are you still like getting involved in the politics, or you're just out of it at this point because you don't believe that any of the votes are legit?
I'm a law professor. I've been a law professor for more than 5 years, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I teach First Amendment law. I teach corporations. I write about it. That's what I'm doing. I'm
Wait,
teaching.
before you and by the way, there was something else with this. Trust litigation. Two parties, basically two corporations. I don't understand why antitrust litigation doesn't necessarily work in coordination with parties in the same way it would work in coordination with businesses. Can you explain that? Like, can that be used to try to create this wedge in order to create a space for a third party?
Because they're not for-profit entities, I think the antitrust laws probably wouldn't apply. I'm glad you brought up antitrust. When we talk about how 5 huge corporate conglomerates control 90% of the television, radio, cable, broadcast, and print media, they got that big because Bill Clinton and Barack Obama and George W. Bush decided not to enforce our antitrust laws that had been on the books since before Teddy Roosevelt. These were criminal enterprises. They violated criminal antitrust laws for years, for decades. And, will those laws ever be imposed? Will we ever have the media back, a true free press, a true free media again? I don't know. The President Trump issued executive orders looking into this, and the Attorney General proposed legislation to rein in the big tech media censorship, but they might be on their way out at this point. And I doubt a Biden-Harris administration is going to change that media in any way, that media that was on their side so heavily to help get them elected.
Yeah, right. No, exactly. Media
is going to push for more.
Yeah, they're not good. Yeah, right. Media was the one that got these guys in office. If they do indeed win, there's no way they're going to push to censor, or push to break up big media from the standpoint of the companies themselves. Tim, I don't agree with you on everything, but I do appreciate the conversation, and you're always welcome to have that conversation here. Don't feel like you're stifled in regards to the way we go talk. This is Tim Canova, political activist and law professor whose work as chairman of Progress for All is focused on supporting progressive candidates and causes at the national, state, and local levels. You can follow Tim on Twitter at Tim_Canova. Or learn about his work at the website progressforall.org. This is Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment with Shane's The Rap.
Fault Lines.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back, and we are taking calls. The phone number is 202-521-1320. Again, the phone number is 202-521-1320. A lot you could call in to talk about, and we're taking calls on pretty much anything. I mean, the election's center stage here, but broadly, our phone lines are open. Again, the phone number is 202-521-1320. Jamarl, interesting conversation last segment. We disagreed on the COVID stuff, but ultimately,
fighting with lefties is so strange to me, and yet that's what it always seems up. I seem to get into more fights with lefties than right wingers. Am I wrong? You might be a bit. I mean, you were going back and forth with Carmine too. I just think it's more notable because you agree on a lot of stuff, but it's sort of different levels of cynicism, and in a way, you're actually in between here. I'll put it like this. I think you're less cynical than Tim. I think you're more cynical than Medea Benjamin or Joel Siegel or other Democratic. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't even say Medea Benjamin, not just a Democrat. She's a progressive. You know what I mean? She's less cynical. She thinks there's hope. She sees that there's a way to push the Biden administration, assuming he gets elected. If he does, you don't. Tim's rejecting the whole thing. He's just rejecting the whole thing. Because at that point, it's like it's hard to have a conversation. It's like, all right, if you think all of it is bunk, then there's nothing to talk about. everything's bunk. Like everything is fake. Then there's nothing to talk about because it's all fake. Like, does that make sense? Like it's a rejection of it all, saying everything is wrong, everything is fraudulent, everything is BS.
I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, that may or may not be true. I don't know that to be true as a flat fact. You may, even if you could point that out in certain areas, that's one thing. But the entirety of the country, and honestly, it even looks like Trump might even still win this thing. And I got to be honest, I am shocked by that phenomena, because to me, when a president loses that many lives, that president loses the race. And in this case, he's still here. I mean, I'm looking at the thing now. Wisconsin, 97% of Wisconsin is in. Trump is at 48.8. Biden is at 49.5. Let's see, 90% of Michigan is in. Trump is at 49.1. Biden is at 49.3. And that's another thing. We always knew there were going to be votes from absentee ballots, mail-in. We knew that stuff was going to be part of the mix. That was going to be part of the equation. Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think I'm less cynical than Tim Canova. But I don't know if the scale is a cynicism scale. I think the scale is whether or not you believe all of this is fraudulent. That's what I think the scale is. I mean, because for me, my arguments with Medea Benjamin have more to do with, this notion that voting for Biden is somehow going to get change, or that you could somehow push Joe Biden. I think that's nonsense. I don't think you can push Joe Biden anywhere. Except in maybe a wheelchair somewhere. But my arguments with Canova boil down to this notion of the elections itself and whether or not the elections themselves have any merit. And that's a different conversation, because that, just gets into the whole thing of democracy or representative government, what that means, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know. It's just weird. Very weird. I agree with most of what he says, if that makes sense. But some of it, yeah, I'm less cynical than he is.
I don't know, man. I kind of fall in the same boat there. I'm pretty cynical. I commentate on this stuff, but ultimately, when we talk about it, I talk about like political philosophy or these underlying things like long-term sea changes. When I ask guests about the reform of the DNC, that's like a faint silver lining of a hope there. I don't actually see that happening because I don't see any sort of viable leadership. And even if I did, these things take many years, usually decades, like multiple decades, for some sort of initial groundswell to turn into a viable, long-lasting, stable political class that can exert its will and ideally represent what most people want and should want, more material stability, more economic stability, the hope of raising families in some sort of peaceful environment, all that stuff. That's why I talk about democracy on this foundational level. Anyway, we've got a whole bunch of callers that are coming in all of a sudden. I think we should go straight to them. I think we may technically have more time for more calls after this, so I'm just going to give the phone number out again, 202-521-1320. Let's go straight to Tarif calling in from New Orleans. Tarif, you're on the line. What's going on?
Like I was saying before, if Trump lose this election, 3 things he should have done was he should have explained his health insurance more, the American choice, to give like a 30-minute infomercial explaining how bad it's supposed to be than affordable care. He should have done that. Jobs program that lead into infrastructure where people spend 2 years in training, getting their trades. Then when they get out, they go rebuild their cities and parks and things like that and levees. There's number 2, he should have spent time on focusing more on African Americans and Latinos. And the 3rd, he should have, just like I was telling y'all before, I was hearing even conservatives talk about this last night. Why he didn't legalize, decriminalize marijuana, I have no idea. So many states was leaning towards it anyway. 60% of the population was for it, for healthcare reasons. 3 things he could have done, especially legalizing marijuana for medical use. He didn't do. So that's all I need to say. That's all I wanted to say.
Thanks, Tarif.
Tarif.
He can do it now.
Thank you for the call.
Trump still could do it. He's lame duck. I mean, that's an interesting question. What does a lame duck Trump do if he loses? Or what does a lame duck Trump do if he wins? I mean, if he wins, I suppose it's a moot point. But what does he do if he loses?
If he loses, I don't know. If he wins and he doesn't do anything with it, I really wonder what that's going to do to the right. Like, in terms of morale, in terms of moral support and where they're going to go, who they're going to push for. I mean, the Republican Party shifted significantly when they elected 2016, when the Lincoln Project cut off a weird neocon movement from a lot of the Republicans. I mean, granted, Trump brought Bolton in, Pompeo's still in as Secretary of State. I'm not trying to say there's no current presence there, but it was a disjuncture in the course of the Republican Party, and I'm curious to see what will happen on the other side of this. But we've got a bunch more callers. Tarif, thank you for the call. Brave, calling in from Atlanta. You're on the line. What's going on, Brave?
Hey, guys. So much I want to address. I feel like I need a full segment, but I try to keep it brief. I can't believe it. I cannot believe it. But I find myself totally agreeing with Tim Canova, and as well as the conservative guest before that, who's usually on, who I totally always disagree with. How can I'm wondering, how can you guys? I know you guys somewhat agree with them, but how can you not be fully cynical at this point? Because I've said it before. This is all an illusion. This is all an illusion, right? And from the point of not actually having a true choice, right? How then do you not fall into? How do you not accept and embrace full cynicism? This is garbage. It's a game, and it makes no sense. I think a lot of people are, especially those who follow politics heavily. I think that we get caught up in being so intellectual and so objective that we just can't see it for what it is, or we just won't call it for what it is, because if we do, then we got to face the circumstances on the ground and make a choice. You guys yourself, I think it was Shane, you made the point that when you were talking to Canova that, it was Canova that made the point that in the past, change came about through like revolution and war and things like that, right? We are at a point where we know clearly that our government, our media, none of this stuff can be trusted. My wife asked me this morning, well, why don't you watch CNN and find out what happened? And my first answer to her was, I can't trust them to tell me the truth. I got to go online and see what I can find. So at some point you have to sit back and say, okay, what are we going to do about this? And it's not going to come by reforming the DNC. It's not going to come by, no offense, Shane, it's not going to come by, building your local situations, because that will require people to learn and be and embrace doing that work. And most people don't even care. They're just willing to turn on the radio and listen to whatever pundits say that your neighbor is your enemy, and then hate them, and then go cast your ballot and you're good. So I find it hard to believe that those people are going to go and build their local communities. So, I'm just saying we're at a point where we're at that point where we're up against a rock in a hard place. And it's not as bad as it could be, but it's getting there very fast. It's getting there rapidly. That's
I hear you.
I guess there.
Brave, I hear you. We got two other callers. There's so much there I want to respond to, but I feel like that would be a theft from the time that these other two callers have. We've got Rose. Thank you for the call, Brave. We've got Rose calling in from California. Rose, you're on the line. What's going on?
It's Ro, and I'm calling. I apologize for my voice. I lost my voice over the weekend. But I was calling to respond to Stedman, who called in on Monday. So I just want to clarify, I'm not white, nor am I a feminist. And, Stedman asked, why do Black people have to make concessions? What I'm asking is, why do Black people who identify with ADOS want to use the U.S. empire to their supposed benefit, knowing that that strategy is predicated on the sustained death and destruction of indigenous peoples in this hemisphere and victims of U.S. foreign policy around the world? I have a lot more to say, but I'll leave it at that because there's only 3 minutes left. But I did want to get that out there. So thanks. Bye.
Thank you for the call. In the most straightforward, basic terms, we don't entirely pay attention to foreign policy and the death and destruction that's reaped. Obama could kill a bunch of people with drones. I remember at one point in the report, it was like 90% of the people being killed were civilians. And come out shoot a basketball. And it was like, wow, that guy can shoot a basketball. And that's the end of the conversation. Shane, I mean, it is not something that it comes up for discussion. It's not something that is one of the main things for debate. The fact that Donald Trump didn't start any additional wars when the last president started multiple wars, that should matter. What do you think, Shane?
Well, I think what we should do is we got one more caller on. I think we should get Yvette Carnell back on, or somebody else from high up in the ADOS movement. And Ro, you can call in and ask her yourself, because I don't want to misrepresent. Anyway, we've got one more call. Margarita calling in from New Mexico. Margarita, you're on. What's going on?
Good morning. This is particularly for Shane. The other day, I think you said something about raw milk. And what does that have to do with the election? In a way, it does. I tasted it. I had it for 2 years here in New Mexico. Can't get it anymore for a variety of reasons. But once you've had the real stuff, you don't want to go back. And I'm like you. I never liked it.
You don't.
And so raw milk is like real democracy. And I'll leave it at that.
It is.
I don't know what I mean. Shane.
It is for real. I do. I'll be honest. I have a guilty pleasure at this point. I need to slow it down. I've been drinking like a gallon plus a day. And it's like 5 to 6% butterfat milk too, which is like way higher than even the vitamin D stuff you get in the stores. I don't even want to think. I don't want to know how many calories I'm consuming, but I'm happy. I'll put it like that. My skin's feeling good. I'm thinking of making some cheeses. Anyway, we got more important stuff to talk about. We're going out right now. You've been listening to another edition of Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Thank you to engineer Andre. Thank you to producers Cam and Raheem. Thank you, Jamarl Thomas, my excellent, indubitable, inveterate co-host. And thank you, audience, for listening. We'll be back tomorrow. Signing off, Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Have a good day, folks.
Fault Lines, Thomas Stranahan, another one in the books. Guys, I am not going to keep this long. I am dead tired. For obvious reasons. I think I did a show at like 3 in the morning. We didn't even finish Fault Lines until, I'm sorry. We didn't finish Fault Lines until 3, and then a show after that. Look, we don't know who's won this election. There are absentee ballots and mail-in ballots that were going to have to be counted. It was always known and understood that there could be a situation where those things needed to be counted. Donald Trump called and claimed a win in advance of those ballots being counted. Regardless of who wins this race is going to be tainted. People who are for Biden are not going to accept Trump winning, and people who are for Trump are not going to accept Joe Biden winning, even though Joe Biden may actually legitimately win this race. If you make the argument that none of it matters, then fair enough. If you make the argument, that all of it's rigged, then, it's like, why are we here? Why are we even talking about it? But if you do believe there's some legitimacy to many of the votes that are being cast, and that this is representative, meaning what the people and the voting and everything else, because there's a drastic difference between what the polling said versus what the voting said. So which one is right? Which one is wrong? I assume that the voting itself is righter than the polling. In which case, the polling got it monstrously wrong. But that also means, by definition, that I, to some degree, give some legitimacy to the election. Either way, the Democrats should have, it's like this should have been a layup. And a man with this many deaths on his back, a man with this level of chaos in the streets, a man with this many people out of their jobs or that have lost their jobs, etc., is neck and neck with his challenger. That, in and of itself, is an indictment. I mean, God, they can't even beat Trump under these conditions. Or at the very least, barely, depending upon how this works out. Biden may, in fact, win this race. But this race should not have even been close. Or as, how can you even blame Trump for doubting the process after Democrats use the feds to mess up the public trust? Look, I doubt Trump because Trump is a liar and Trump lies as easily as Trump breathes. And in one situation after the next, Trump lies. Trump was lying. Trump was attacking the process before the process even started. So he's not. In fact, why are you even looking at Trump as being an honest actor? Why? I mean, Trump has never been an honest actor. I'm sorry, guys. The Democrats look mad shady in this one. Democrats are mad shady. So don't, Democrats are mad shady. Ish Salazar, very shady. The only Democrats run states stopped counting last night. The writing on the ballots as we speak. No, that's not shady. Look, each state has its own electoral laws and rules. And as of such, there's some states that couldn't touch the ballots, meaning they couldn't even read the ballots until election day. It varies from state to state. If you're saying that we should have a universal voting system, then yes, I agree with you. Do you think the push for mail-in voting is part of the reason for this cluster nut situation? Yeah, kind of. I mean, it's because you have this combination of mail-in votes, then you have the people coming in to vote, and then you have perception. All of three of which matter. If the public perception comes away that they don't necessarily trust the vote, you have a problem. And Trump attacking it basically gives that right off the bat. Now, the catch becomes, it may not matter what Trump wants, especially if Trump loses and the mechanisms basically carry Trump out of office. But right now, Trump is talking about taking it to the Supreme Court. And it's a court where he's put on 3 members of that bench. If you're talking about a fair vote, like it doesn't even fit into that universe where you're talking about basically installing a person in the election. So all of this is a worst case scenario. None of this is good. And right now we have no idea who's the winner of this race. Like, share, and subscribe. Thanks, everyone.